Welcome back to Potter Read. Today's adventure. Harry's blood opened the sealed Peverell Crypt at age 6 and named him the last master of death. If you haven't already, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The river remembers. Harry Potter knew exactly how many steps it took to cross the kitchen of number 4 Privet Drive carrying a gravy boat. 11 if he went around the table the long way. 9 if he cut the corner by the fridge, but the corner by the fridge put him in reach of Aunt Marge, and Aunt Marge had opinions about boys who came in reach. He went the long way, 11 steps. He counted them under the noise because counting was a thing that belonged to him and not many things did. Runty little thing, isn't he? Marge said to the room at large. Marge said everything to the room at large. She had been at Privet Drive for 2 days, and the house had rearranged itself around her like water around a dropped brick. You can always tell bad blood by the frame. Petunia, you feed him. He eats, Aunt Petunia said in the voice she kept for questions about Harry, which was the voice other people kept for questions about drains. Eats, HMPH. Marge held out her glass without looking at it, and Uncle Vernon filled it without looking either, a piece of choreography they had perfected across 20 years of Sunday lunches. It's not the feeding, it's the stock. You can pour whatever you like into a bad dog. I've said it before. If the bitch is wrong, the pup's wrong. Harry set the gravy boat down at the exact center of the trivet and thought about the word stock. At school, Mrs. Bright had a stockpot poster, carrots, bones, and onion wearing its skin like a jumper. He was fairly sure Aunt Marge did not mean soup. She meant his mother. She usually got to his mother by pudding, but today she was ahead of schedule. He was 6 years old, and he had worked out the following things the way other children work out conkers and times tables. That adult said the worst things in the most comfortable chairs, that his parents had died in a car crash because everyone said so, and that everyone said so a little too quickly, and that when Aunt Marge started on stock, the safest place in the house was somewhere else. Boy, Vernon said, garden, now, you're putting Ripper off his food. Ripper, a bulldog with a face like a dropped pie, was at that moment eating a sausage off a china plate on the floor and had not registered Harry's existence since Thursday. Harry did not point this out. 6 years old, and he already understood that in this house, facts were furniture. They got moved to wherever they were wanted. The garden was better anyway. June had made the hedges heavy, and behind the shed there was a strip of shade where nobody bothered him, and if he lay down flat in it, the world went quiet in a green underneath sort of a way, and sometimes this was his best secret, better than the plastic soldier and the marble and the milk bottle top he kept in a sock under his cot. The quiet had a texture to it, a hush inside the hush, like a room behind a wall. He had never told anyone about the room behind the wall because he had learned what happened when he told the Dursleys about things they couldn't see. He got 40 minutes of the shade. Then the back door banged, and Marge came down the lawn with her glass in one hand and Ripper's lead in the other, and Ripper came with her, and this time the dog registered him fine. Afterwards, Harry could never put the next minute in order. There was Marge saying, "Get him then," in the fond voice she used only for the dog. There was the lead being slipped off the collar. There was the shed wall against his back and his own arm up, and a bright specific pain in the meat of his left hand, and Marge laughing the way people laugh at television. There was Vernon in the doorway shouting, not at the dog. And there was the thing that happened inside his chest, which had happened twice before in his life. Once when Dudley's gang had him cornered behind the bins at school and he had ended up, with no stairs involved, on the kitchen roof. Once when Petunia came at his hair with the scissors and by morning it had all grown back. A wrench. A hook behind his breastbone, like being grabbed by the collar from inside, except that both other times the hook had simply yanked him away, anywhere out. This time the hook had an opinion about where. His hand was bleeding. That mattered. He didn't know how he knew it mattered, but the blood ran hot down his wrist, and the hush behind the wall of the world opened like an ear, and something old and patient on the far side of the quiet caught the scent of him and said in no words at all, "There you are." The garden folded shut around him like a book finishing. He came down on grass. Not lawn grass, the tall kind, hip high on a 6-year-old, silver green and hissing, a whole hillside of it leaning one direction under a wind he couldn't feel. That was the first wrong thing, and he catalogued it quick from behind his fringe, the same as he catalogued everything. The grass moved and the air didn't. The second wrong thing was the light. It was evening light, thick and slanted, and the color of the inside of a jar of honey, and it had been the middle of the afternoon in Little Winging. The third wrong thing was the quiet. He knew quiet. He was a connoisseur of quiet, a collector. He could tell the cupboard's box dark hush from the 2 a.m. hush of the kitchen, from the hush of a classroom after a wrong answer. This was none of those. This was the hush from behind the wall, but it was not behind anything now. He was standing inside it. It lay over the valley the way snow lies, rounding everything, and beneath it, far down, the way you feel a lorry through the pavement before you hear it, something was aware. Harry stood very still in the tall grass, bleeding, and did the sums. He was somewhere else. The hook had taken him somewhere else, which it had done before, so that was all right. Roofs happened. You waited, and adults came, furious, and life went on. Except the kitchen roof had been 20 feet from the kitchen. There was no roof here. There was a valley long and shallow and bare of houses, with a ribbon of paler ground winding along its bottom where a river had once been and thought better of it, and one enormous willow leaning over the dry bed like a woman looking for something she'd dropped, and on the low round hill in front of him, hill was the wrong word. It was too neat, too deliberate, a green mound the shape of an upturned bowl, the broken ribs of a little stone building, roofless, one arched window still holding its shape against the sky. Nobody was coming. He understood that with a clarity that ought to have buckled him and instead oddly steadied him. Nobody knew where this was. He didn't know where this was. If he wanted adults, furious or otherwise, he would have to find them himself. His hand hurt in slow, deep beats. He pressed it against his shirt and started walking, because the mound was the only landmark, and because he examined this reason from several sides as he walked and found it strange and kept walking anyway. The mound was where the awareness lived. The lorry through the pavement feeling got stronger with every step. It was not a bad feeling. That was the strangest part. It felt like being expected. The grass gave way to shorter turf, cropped as though sheep kept it, though there were no sheep and no droppings, and the turf ran up the flank of the mound to the ruin. Up close, the little building was older than any church he'd seen on any school trip, older looking even than the ones in Dudley's castle book that Dudley had never read. The stones were gray and lichened, shaggy with yellow blots of it, and carved over the arch of the doorway, worn almost to a shadow of a shape, was a mark. A triangle. Inside the triangle, a circle, down through both, from apex to base, a straight line. Harry stopped in the doorway and looked at it for a long time. He had never seen it before. He was certain of that, the way you're certain about faces. And his whole body knew it, the way his body knew the smell of cut grass or the particular creak of the fourth stair, things from so early and so deep that knowing them wasn't memory anymore, it was just being made of something. "That's mine," he said out loud to nobody, and then went red, because it was a mad thing to say, and Dudley would have made a week of it. But nobody laughed. The hush took the words and folded them away carefully, like something it intended to keep. Inside the ruin there was no floor rubble, no crisp packets, none of the biography of ruins. Only turf, and at the center, flush with the ground, a great slab of stone that was not gray like the walls but black. A deep, drinking black basalt, smooth, uncracked, and cut into its face, sharp as the day of its carving, the same mark, triangle, circle, line. And around the mark, in a spiral going out from it, lines of letters in an alphabet he didn't know, until his eyes crossed a certain point in the spiral and the letters stopped being strange, and he realized he was reading them. "Here lie the three who crossed," it said, "and here waits what they carried, sealed until the river sends our blood back to US." Harry crouched at the edge of the slab with his arms around his knees. The sensible thing was to walk away, find a road, find a phone box, be shouted at, go home to the cupboard. He built the sensible thing in his head, brick by brick, and inspected it, and knew he wasn't going to do it, and it wasn't the mark or the hush or the huge slanted light that decided him. It was the words, our blood. He had spent 6 years in a house where his blood was a thing wrong with him. Bad stock, the bitch is wrong, the pup's wrong. Here was a stone older than every church in the castle book that said our. His hand was still bleeding, a slow ooze through the crust where Ripper's teeth had gone in. He looked at it and looked at the slab. "All right," he said to the stone, quite softly, the way you'd answer someone who had been very patient. He put his torn palm flat against the carved mark. The blood touched the stone, and the stone drank, not soaked. Drank. He felt the pull of it in his wrist, gentle and definite, one swallow, no more, the way Mrs. Bright took just one biscuit to be polite, and then out from his palm, following the spiral of letters, light poured into the carving, not any color he could have named to a teacher. The color of the last of the evening before someone puts a light on, if that had been a color you could pour. The spiral filled, the mark filled. The triangle, the circle, the line, blazing quietly under his hand like a struck match cupped against wind. Deep in the mound, something vast and slow, some tumbler in a lock the size of the hill, went over with a sound he felt in his teeth and heard nowhere at all. The voice, when it came from everywhere and arrived like weather rather than sound, and it did not boom. Afterwards, that was the thing he kept returning to. Every big voice in his life had boomed. This one was quiet the way the bottom of the sea is quiet, an enormous settled stillness with pressure behind it, and it said, in a tone of vast and careful astonishment, "Blood of the youngest brother." The slab split down the line of the mark and swung inward and down, becoming stairs. Cold air breathed up out of the dark, clean cold, cellar cold, no rot in it at all, and threaded through it a smell that he would spend years trying to fit words to. River stones after rain, snuff candles, the pause between the end of one song and the start of the next. The light from the carving ran off the slab like water and down the stairs ahead of him, low along the steps' edges, a path of it laid on. Small boys are told never to go with strangers, and Harry, who had been told almost nothing kindly, had still absorbed this. He stood at the top of the stairs and interrogated the feeling rising through him, because it was important to know, was this the feeling of a stranger with sweets? It was. He tested it twice. Strangers with sweets wanted something and pretended not to. This wanted something and said so. Every stone of it said so. The whole hill was one long-held breath. And under the wanting there was something he had no experience of at all and identified only slowly, by ruling everything else out, the way you'd identify a color you'd never seen. He was being welcomed. He counted the steps as he went down. There were 33. The stair opened into a round chamber, and the chamber was full of the light with no name, rising now from grooves cut in the floor, and the floor's grooves made the same spiral as the slab, and at the spiral's heart stood 3 stone tables, and on the tables lay 3 stone men. He knew they were not sleeping and not bodies. They were carvings, effigies, though he didn't have the word yet and privately called them the Stone Lords for years afterwards, even once he did. But the carver had been good, better than good. The Stone Lords had pores and eyelashes, they had calluses. The nearest had a scar on his thumb the exact shape a knife slip makes when you're cutting a green branch toward yourself, which Harry knew because of the plastic-handled knife Dudley got and lost within a week. 3 men. The first lay huge and restless even in stone, a warrior's shape, hands crossed on the hilt of a sword whose blade was carved as though it were made of knots. No, he looked closer, not knots. A wand wound about with carved wind. The face was proud and hungry, and someone had shut its eyes with more tact than tenderness. The second lay slighter, finer, a ring on his stone finger with its stone gem turned to the palm, hidden, the hand curled around it, guarding it even here. His face was turned a little away from the room, toward something over his shoulder that wasn't there. The third. Harry stood by the third a long moment. An old man, this one, the only old one, thin as October, and his hands held nothing at all. They were folded empty on his chest in the manner of a man who has just given something back and is glad the errand's done. And his face, the carver had done something with the mouth, some fractional settling at its corners. Of the 3, only he looked finished. Beyond the 3 tables stood a 4th, empty, swept, waiting. It was shorter than the others. Harry looked at the short, empty table, and the deep water of the quiet moved, and the voice assembled itself again out of the whole room at once. Up close, inside it, it was not one voice. It was a braid of them, dozens deep, hundreds, a rope of voices twisted back through so much time that the far end frayed into wind and water. But the strand that carried the strand nearest him was an old man's, dry and level and faintly amused, and Harry knew without deciding to know it that it belonged to the 3rd Stone Lord, the one with the empty hands. "Little heir," it said, "you are early." "Sorry," Harry said. It came out automatically. Sorry was oil. Sorry was how you got through Tuesdays. Then, because the room seemed to be waiting for more, "The dog bit me. I didn't pick where." Something moved through the braided voice that in a person would have been a slow blink. "The river picked," it said. "The river has been picking longer than there have been dogs. Come here, child. Let us look at what has come back to us." The light rose around the 4th, empty table, and Harry, noting, in the accountant's corner of his head that never quite shut, that he could still see the stairs, that the stairs were still open, that the voice had made sure he could see they were still open, walked into it. The light did not touch him so much as read him. It went over him the way Petunia went over Dudley on the first morning of school, collar to shoes, missing nothing, except that it went under as well down through him, page by page, and where it passed he felt each thing in him named and set back exactly where it had been, but squarer, the way books stand differently once someone who loves them has handled the shelf. It found the plastic soldier and the marble and the milk bottle top, hidden in the sock, hidden in the cot. It found the counting. It found the room behind the wall and the 2 a.m. kitchen hush. It found something on his forehead that made the whole chamber go still, all the grooves of light steadying at once like a held breath. Found last going deepest, a night he did not remember that lived in him as a green flash and a high cold laugh, and under both, unaccountably, the smell of someone he had loved. The braided voice said slowly, "You have been across the river." "I don't know what that means," Harry said. "Death took you," said the voice, "and could not keep you. You went down to the water, and the water weighed you, and the water sent you back. In 700 years, child, blood of ours has come to this door 11 times. Landless cousins, air hunters wearing our name like a borrowed coat, 2 who were ours in truth, and good men, and the door knew them and stayed shut, for the seal does not ask only whose blood. It asks where the blood has been, it asks for the river's mark." The voice drew nearer all around him, the way dusk draws near. "It has waited for one of the line who has already crossed and been refused. You understand what I am telling you?" "No," Harry said. And then, because the light had squared him up, because in this room the facts were not furniture and could not be moved to where they were wanted, a bit, "You waited for someone who died once and didn't." "Yes, and that's me. That is you. Harry James, son of James, son of Fleamont, son of Henry, the line of the daughters of Iolanthe, daughter of the sons of Ignatus." The names went by like stations, the last living blood of Peverell. And by the seal's own asking, the voice did not swell. It deepened, the room's light bowing down the grooves toward him like grass under wind, the master of death. The words landed on him and sat there, enormous, like a cathedral perched on a fence post. Harry looked down at himself, knees with scabs at 3 different ages, Dudley's old shirt with its collar gone soft as a rag, one shoe whose sole talked when it rained. 6, he was 6, he knew what 6 could lift. "I think," he said carefully, because the room deserved care, "you've got it wrong. I'm not the master of anything, I'm not even allowed the good towels. The amusement in the old strand of the voice moved again, nearer the surface. What do you imagine it means, little heir? Command, armies of bone, a black throne on a cold hill. Light in the floor grooves dimmed, all but one line of it, one thread running from the foot of the fourth table away into the dark at the chamber's edge. Where he saw now, the wall was not a wall but a lip of stone overrunning darkness, over a channel of something that moved like water and was not water, going by soft and heavy in the dark, patient as all the time there had ever been. Come, it is easier shown, nothing here will touch you, nothing here would dare. He walked with the voice to the edge of the dark river. The cold came off it in slow waves, and the hush lay on it thickest of all, and yet it was, he groped for it, a worked cold, a kept cold, like the cold of a larder which exists so that good things last. Look into it and hold still, said the voice. This the crypt remembers better than anything, for we have told it to ourselves 700 years, how the account was opened. And in the moving dark, the way a story stands up out of a fire if you stare long enough, he saw it. A twilight road, 3 brothers walking, cloaked, travel-stained, the tallest laughing too loudly at his own remark. A river across the road, swollen, hungry, its spite plain even in reflection. A river that drowned, that existed to drown, and knew its trade. He watched the 3 stop at the bank. Watched the tallest roll up his sleeves, wands out, words he couldn't hear, and a bridge assemble itself out of mist and insolence, arching over the water's rage. Watched them cross, dry-shod, delighted with themselves. And watched the shape that was waiting at the middle of the bridge. It had no face he could fix on afterward, and it did not need one. The river's fury went silent under it. Even in a memory of a memory, 7 centuries deep in a hillside, everything in Harry that was animal knew exactly what stood on that bridge, and everything in him that was Peverell noted, with a collector's interest, that it was polite. He watched it bow. Watched it, cheated of 3 drownings, offer 3 prizes with the ancient courtesy of a creditor extending terms. Watched the tallest brother demand a wand of power, the eldest stone lord, Harry realized. The sword on his effigy was no sword, and watched the shape break a branch from an elder tree at the bank as one might snap a wafer. Watched the second brother, the one who even here stood angled away from the road, toward somewhere behind him, ask for the power to call the dead back and receive a stone lifted glistening from the killing river itself. Watched the third, the youngest, the one who trusted nothing about any of this, stand a long time silent while the shape waited on him with what might have been, in something so still, curiosity. Then the youngest asked for the means to go from that place without being followed. And the shape paused, and in the pause was something Harry had no name for at nearly 7 and would have called at 17 respect, and it took off its own cloak and gave it to him. The dark river smoothed, the story lay back down. The wand was taken back within the year, the braided voice said. Its brag was a knife in the dark before the boast was cold. The stone broke its holder's heart at leisure, what it calls comes grey and grieving and only mostly. The voice gentled, but the cloak was returned. That is the whole of it, child. That is the mystery the greedy have died over for 7 centuries, and it is small enough to fit in your pocket. 2 brothers tried to beat the river. 1 brother asked only to walk home. He wore the cloak long and gave it to his son, and greeted the ferryman as a friend and crossed like a man going into his supper. The last strand of light rose from the floor and stood before Harry, and in it, faint as breath on glass, the mark, triangle, circle, line. Wand, stone, cloak, not weapons, little heir, not prizes. An account opened at a bridge and never yet closed, and the master of it is not the one who owns the most of death, it is the one the river will deal with. The one who has crossed and come back and does not run and does not grasp. It has been a long time since there was one. The old dead grow worn, keeping books with no lord to read them. The mark of light drifted, settled, sank into his right palm, into, through, gone, and where it passed the dog bite closed without fuss, leaving a pale seam, and beneath the seam, visible only when he turned his hand against the light, a fainter seam yet, 3 lines, a closed curve, a stroke. He would learn that most people could not see it at all. He would learn who could, and that the list was instructive. Weight came with it. Not pain, weight, the specific sensation of being handed something and having your arms taken seriously, and his knees nearly went, and then the chamber itself seemed to get its shoulder under the load, and the weight didn't lift but redistributed, the way a rucksack sits suddenly right, and the voice said with the first thing like sternness it had shown, "We do not put on the child what the man will carry, it will grow as you grow." That is how it was always meant to be worn, and why the grasping ones could never wear it. Harry stood in the settling light, holding his own hand, and asked the question that had been forming since the light had read him, page by page, and paused so long at the green flash and the smell of someone he had loved. "The river sent me back," he said, "when it took me, when I was little." He kept his eyes on the dark water. Was there anyone else that night going across? The chamber went very still, even the not water seemed to slow. 2, the voice said at last, with enormous care, "Ahead of you. They did not cross alone, if that is your asking. No one crosses alone, it is the last thing that is true of everyone." Then into his silence, "Ask it, child, you will not break anything here. This is the one house in all the world where that question is not rude. Can I see them?" His own voice came out smaller than he meant it to, 4 years old, cupboard-sized. You showed me the brothers, can you show? No, the word was gentle and total, bedrock under a hand. The brothers I may show you because the brothers are ours, kept here, told here, stone and story. Your mother and your father are not a story yet, little one. They are still real, and the real dead keep no house on this side, not even this house. That is the first law of what you now are, and I will not soften it, because everyone else will lie to you about it all your life. The master of death is not the master of that. No one calls them back whole. Not the stone in the second brother's hand, not all the ledgers under this hill, not blood, not love, and love has tried hardest. Harry stood at the lip of the dark river with his arms straight down at his sides and his fists shut, and he did not cry, and it took everything, and the crypt watched him do it, and did not tell him it was all right, which he was grateful for obscurely forever because it was. But said the voice, and it had come very near now, near as a blanket's edge drawn up, hear the second law, which is also true. The river keeps nothing it takes, it carries. Everything that goes down to that water is carried, not lost, and the account of it is kept, and names are the keeping. Your dead are not in this room, child, and they are not nowhere. And there are two things I may honestly give you tonight, so hold out your hands, for this house does not let its own leave empty. He held out his hands. 6 years of Privet Drive were in the flinch of it, the half-beat where his arms expected to be slapped down. The crypt pretended not to notice, which was its own kind of courtesy. Into his right hand, out of the dark water, rose and rolled a stone. River-worn, flat, gray-black, the size of a 50-pence piece, and wrong the way the valley was wrong, cold past cold, and heavier than it should be, and thrumming faintly, a purr with no cat. A toll stone, said the voice. Every lord of this line carried one. It knows the river roads, of which the world is full, and wizards have forgotten all but the loudest. It will bring you here when you are called, or when you call. And once, mark me, little heir, once between each visit home, not more, for tolls are dear. If you are in a place you must not be with people who mean you harm, it will take you out by the waterways to somewhere safe. It is not a toy. It is not for escaping chores. The old dry strand of the voice was unmistakably a grandfather's now. We can tell the difference. We have been watching children lie for 700 years. Okay, Harry whispered. The stone lay in his palm over the hidden mark, cold on cold and fit. And the second gift is a word, the voice said, not a spell, a fact. You asked after your mother and your father, and I have told you what I cannot do. Here is what I can. When the river weighed you that night and sent you back, child, the river does not send anyone back. In all its age it has made a mere handful of exceptions, and it does not make them for power, and it does not make them for luck. Something walked into the water ahead of you that outweighed you. The voice lowered until it was almost only pressure. Her word is written on you. It is on your skin and under it and in the seam of you wherever the light read. I have never, in 700 years of keeping this door, seen a person so entirely paid for. Harry looked at the pale seam on his palm and at the dark water and did not understand and understood. She went first, he said, so it would have to deal with her, before me. The account of Lily Potter, said the crypt, with the formality of a thing being entered in a ledger that nothing in this world or out of it could unwrite, is the finest this house has ever recorded. And it is your inheritance as much as the mark, and it is worth more. The light along the floor grooves began very slowly to lower. Somewhere above, 33 steps up, the summer evening was going on with itself. The voice, when it spoke again, had stepped back into the whole room, become weather once more. Go home, little heir, grow, learn your letters, for there is much here to read, and it will keep. This house is good at keeping. Tell no one what you cannot help, and be slow to help it. There will be an accounting to make when you are ready, 3 of them in the old form, and none before its time. The stairs brightened at their edges, courteous, unhurried. And when the loud world finds you, and it will, child, doors like this one are heard opening in places you cannot imagine. Remember what you saw in the water. 2 brothers tried to make death serve them. Your grandfather asked only to walk home. Walk home, Harry. The river road took him the way dusk takes a garden, gradually, then all at once. He came back to himself, standing on the strip of grass behind the shed at number 4, in the blue end of the evening, with the sprinkler hissing 2 doors down and a blackbird going over its scales on the aerial. And for one long minute the ordinariness of it was the most fantastic thing he had ever seen. The kitchen light was on. Through the window, mime-sized, Vernon was on the telephone, plum-colored, jabbing the air. Petunia stood beside him, wringing a tea towel into rope. Marge sat at the table with a brandy and the put-upon look of a woman whose evening had been ruined by other people's carelessness with their orphans. Harry stood in the dark garden and read the scene like one of Mrs. Bright's wall charts they had noticed hours ago. He checked the sky, the deep blue in the west, 5 hours, maybe 6. Vernon on the phone would not be the police. Vernon would sooner have eaten the phone than invite questions about the boy. That jabbing was Vernon canceling something. Explaining something away. What he says when what he cannot have his people knowing. The back door was unlocked. He was 3 steps into the kitchen before the tea towel hit the floor. What followed took 40 minutes and was loud, and Harry stood in the middle of it with his hands behind his back. the right one curled around the toll stone, which had gone, the moment he crossed the doorsill, as warm and inert as any pebble, and let it break over him in the usual sequence. Where, how, what will people after everything we under our roof? Marge contributed stock. Ripper, the author of the entire evening, slept through it under the table with a sausage-greased chin. Where? Vernon arrived finally at the only question that mattered to him, bending down into Harry's face, close enough that Harry could count the burst threads in his left eye. You were gone 6 hours. A child does not vanish from a garden. Where? And here Harry did something new and felt himself do it and marked the feeling, because it was the first visible interest the Crypt's weight paid him. He did not flinch and he did not gabble. He looked up into his uncle's enormous furious face, and the hush, his hush, the room behind the wall, except it went with him now. He could feel the door of it under his hand, settled over him like the valley's quiet over the grass, and out of it he said, in a voice that surprised them both by being level, "The dog bit me and I ran and I got lost. A man told me the way back." Every word true. Held up his left hand, with the pale seam where the teeth had gone in healed days too well, and he watched his uncle look at it and watched something move behind his uncle's eyes. The flinch Vernon always flinched when the wrongness of Harry surfaced where he had to see it. Vernon straightened up and stepped back, and it was he who broke the look, not Harry, and both of them knew it, and only one of them understood what had shifted in the kitchen's small cold war. "Cupboard," Vernon said hoarse. "No supper." Cupboard door clicked, the bolt went across. Harry sat on his cot in the box dark and worked his hand into the sock beneath the thin mattress and laid out his estate on the blanket by feel. One plastic soldier kneeling, rifle raised, one marble the green of held breath, one milk bottle top embossed gone soft at the crimp. He added the toll stone to the center of the arrangement and sat looking at where it lay in the dark, cold again now, faintly, politely cold, like a guest keeping to itself. Master of death, he thought, the words still would not go into 6-year-old anywhere. They stood outside him like the mound had stood in the valley, too big, too old, patient, but our blood went in. Our blood had gone in on contact and taken root, and he lay back on the cot and turned the day over and over with the tirelessness of a child studying a chestnut. And when he finally slept, past midnight, past Marge's gramophone snore, it was on his side with his fist shut round the stone, and the last thought going down with him was not of the dark river or the 3 stone lords or even of the word written on him that he could not read. It was, "The door knew me, out of everyone. It was waiting for me. In the morning there would be chores, and Marge until Sunday, and school, where he knew better than to be clever. There would be years of cupboard yet. He was 6, not stupid. But the arithmetic of his life had changed by 1 term, and he did the sum again in the dark to be sure of it, and it held. Everything in this house belonged to them. 1 hill in the world belonged to him. Very far north of Privet Drive, in a castle that officially did not exist, on a shelf in a round office full of sleeping portraits, a silver instrument the size of a teapot had spent 6 hours doing something it had never done in a century and a half of faithful, tedious spinning. It had stopped. Albus Dumbledore stood before the shelf with his spectacles in his hand, being looked at unhelpfully by a phoenix. The instrument was one of 4 keyed to the wards on a house in Surrey, the newest of the 4, the one he had made himself in the raw week after Godric's Hollow, its whorls of smoke tuned to the strongest wardstone he had ever been permitted to build on, a mother's dying claim on her son. It had spun without pause for 4 years and 8 months. At 17 minutes past 2 that afternoon it had gone still and stood still until 22 minutes past 8, and then as he watched it had shivered and resumed, but wrongly. It spun now with a hitch in it, a syncopation, the smoke inside its glass curling in 2 strands where there had always been one, the second strand darker, older colored, moving a half-beat behind the first like a second voice under a melody, like a counter-signature under a name. He had been a very great wizard for a very long time, and he stood in his quiet office and could not read his own instrument. On the desk behind him lay a letter, delivered an hour earlier by a suspicious-minded owl, in the anxious looping hand of Arabella Figg. It reported that the Dursleys' nephew had vanished from a locked garden at around 2 in the afternoon and reappeared inside it at around 8:30, that the Dursleys had telephoned no one except twice, a firm that installed door bolts, that Mr. Tibbles had kept watch on the boy's window since, and that she had underlined this twice, pressing hard enough to spot the ink. Every cat in Wisteria Walk and Privet Drive combined, Madam S. included, had spent the evening sitting on walls facing number 4 and would not be called in and would not say why. Dumbledore read the letter 3 times. Then he crossed to the shelf and watched the little instrument limp through its new doubled figure, the dark strand shadowing the bright one, patient, unhurried, keeping its own time. "Well," he said at last softly to the phoenix, or to the instrument, or to whatever had signed its name under his. "And who are you?" The instrument spun. The dark strand did not answer him. It had been keeping account since before his castle had foundations, and it did not report to headmasters. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Names in the Grass. The bolts went on the cupboard on Tuesday. 2 of them brass, fitted by a man in overalls who kept glancing at the door's dimensions and then at Petunia, and visibly deciding, in the manner of tradesmen everywhere, that what customers stored in their own cupboards was between them and God. Harry watched the fitting from the stairs, 4 steps up, chin on the banister rail. He found he was not upset about the bolts and spent some time working out why, because his feelings had begun requiring an explanation lately. They arrived changed like posts that had been opened and resealed. The answer, when he located it, made him hold onto the rail. The bolts didn't matter because the cupboard could no longer hold him. He knew it with the same flat certainty he knew his own name. The toll stone was in his sock, and the stone knew the river roads, and a bolt was a thing on the near side of a door, and the river roads did not use doors. The Dursleys were bolting a cage that had already stopped being one, and only one person in the house knew, and it was the person in the cage. And there was a word for what that arrangement made him feel, and he was not going to use it, because the warden had said tolls are dear and not for escaping chores, and he had decided to be the kind of person old voices under hills could trust. But he kept the knowledge on him at all times, the whole rest of his childhood, like a coin sewn into a coat. Marge left Sunday with Ripper in a taxi that sagged. Life at number 4 resumed its usual grammar: chores in the morning, school in the day, silence at meals, the fourth stairs creak. Except that everything had a second layer now, and Harry moved through the week like a person newly fitted with glasses, seeing edges where there had been smudge. The hush went with him. That was the first discovery. What had lived behind the shed in a strip of shade was portable now. It hung a half-step off his right shoulder like a held-open door, and through it, at certain moments, in certain places, the world's volume dropped and he could hear underneath. There was an underneath. That was the second discovery, and it took the whole week to shape. At school on Wednesday, walking the corridor past the display of Class 3's paper sunflowers, he passed old Mr. Ellery the caretaker, and underneath Mr. Ellery, faint as print showing through a page, he heard a rhythm, a pit-pat-pit, tiny, going nowhere. It bothered him all through maths until he placed it: a dog's feet. Mr. Ellery walked in a cloud of the sound of a dog that was not there, and Harry thought about it. And at home time he saw Mr. Ellery pause at the school gate and put his hand down, absent, palm open at the height of a remembered head, and Harry stood holding the strap of his bag and understood that he was watching a man be followed by something faithful, and that no one else could hear it, and that it was not frightening. That was the fact he kept turning over on the walk home. Everyone had told him in stories, at Halloween, in Dudley's comics, that the dead were a horror. Nobody had mentioned that a dead dog would still be doing its duty at the school gate at 3:15. The Grey, he called it privately by Thursday, not a place, a margin. The world had a margin and things were written in it. He experimented with the caution of a child who had never once been able to afford recklessness. He did not stare. Staring, he sensed, was rude in a margin. He learned to let his eyes rest just past things, past the corner of Magnolia Crescent where the pavement went cold on hot days and the cold had a shape roughly the height of a postman, past the bus shelter where a bunch of garage flowers had been taped to the pole and gone brown, where sometimes, at the edge of hearing, a boy's voice counted to 3 and laughed and never got to what came after 3. None of it touched him, all of it turned toward him. That was the unsettling part, and he took it to bed and inspected it against everything the crypt had said, and matched it, finally, to a thing from before. Every cat on 2 streets sitting on walls, facing number 4, refusing to come in. Things in the margin noticed him the same direction. He was, he concluded, some sort of lit window. On Friday he found the churchyard. He had passed St. Aldhelm's perhaps 400 times in his life. It sat behind its yew hedge on the corner where Wisteria Walk met the high road, a squat Norman-towered thing with a notice board about jumble sales, and it had never once been interesting. What changed on Friday was the route. Dudley and Piers Palkis had established themselves at the swings with a project involving a magnifying glass, and Harry, reading the situation with a veteran's speed, took the long way. The long way ran along the yew hedge. And the hedge, when he came level with the lich gate, was quiet in the specific, textured, room-like manner that he had spent a week learning to read. He stopped at the gate. Beyond it, mown grass, leaning stones, a horse chestnut of great age, a tap with a green watering can chained to it. The margin here was not a margin, it was the whole page. "You're either lost," said a voice from the direction of the chestnut tree, "or you're the one the whole yard's been on about since Tuesday week. Either way, shut the gate." It bangs. Harry shut the gate. The voice belonged, on inspection, to a woman sitting on the flat top of a chest tomb with her ankles crossed, and she was dead. He knew it the same instant he saw her, without alarm and without ceremony. She was silver-gray through, like a photograph of somebody, and printed on the air rather than standing in it, and the tomb showed through her hem. A woman of perhaps 60, in a coat with big buttons and a hat with a wilted felt flower, a handbag on her ghost of a lap, a face like a nutcracker, hinged, sharp, ready. "Both maybe," Harry said. "I'm avoiding Dudley." "Avoiding is a skill," the ghost said. "I avoided 2 husbands and Hitler. Come here where I can look at you." He came and stood in front of the tomb. Being looked at by her was like being looked at by the light in the crypt, only with commentary. Her eyes went collar, shoes, elbows, the mended place on his sleeve, and totted him up. and her face did the thing adult faces did when they finished the sum, except that on her the arithmetic ended in a short, sharp nod, filed under seen it before and not as at school, and a glance away. She said, "They don't feed you and they don't tell you anything, nothing new under the sun." "But that's not what the yard's been whispering about, is it?" She leaned forward, the felt flower leaned with her. "You've got the ferryman's look, child. I've seen it once before on a chaplain in the war, 3 days before a wall came down on him. He had it a little. You've got it like a lamp." She sat back. "Well, introductions. Alma Kitely, late of Meadowcroft Road. Died the 8th of March, 1944, in circumstances I declined to make interesting for you. And you are the Potter boy from Privet Drive, and something enormous has written its name on you, and half the yard is beside itself, and old Hobbs, who has not come out of his grave since the coronation, came up on Tuesday to look at the glow off you and went back down satisfied. So, since nobody living ever explains anything to anybody, what do you know and what do you need?" And Harry, who had told no one anything for 6 years as a policy, sat down on the grass in front of a dead woman and told her nearly all of it. The dog, the valley, the door that drank, the 3 stone lords, the voice made of braided voices, master of death, which he said quietly with a check over his shoulder first, in the voice you use for a thing that could be confiscated, the list of what he was not to do, the stone in his sock. Mrs. Kitely heard him out with her hands folded on her handbag, and when he finished she was silent for the space of 3 chestnut leaves falling, and when she spoke the hinged sharpness had gone careful, which he would learn was her version of taking off a hat. "Master of death," she said. "Well, I'm C of E, or I was, and I shan't pretend to the theology of it, but I'll tell you what I've learned in 40 years of being what I am now, since nobody else will. There's a downhill in everything, child. Everything that happens here leans some direction, like the grass leans, and the lean goes toward the water. We all know it, the yard knows it, even Hobbs knows it, and we're not troubled by it, whatever the living choose to imagine. The trouble is only ever in the leaving things behind. And once in a very great while something walks about up here with the water's own light on it, and when that happens," she nodded past him at the yard, the leaning stones, the whole silver census of the parish, "everything that's waiting gets 1 degree less tired. You'll be wanting rules. I can see you're a child who collects rules, and quite right in your position. Here are mine, and they're better than most, because I've watched 2 of your sort of people come through this yard doing it wrong. 1. Never promise the dead anything. Not I'll come back Tuesday, not I'll tell your daughter, not nothing, not ever. A promise to the dead doesn't wear out. It'll sit on you like a stone in a field, and their side never forgets, because forgetting is a living luxury. 2. Names are payment. If one of us helps you, you learn our name and you say it once properly. That's the whole wage. You'd be astonished what's on offer in a yard like this for the price of being said aloud by somebody warm. 3. If ever you meet one of us that's all want and no name, you walk away, not run. Walk. Running has a smell. All want and no name, Harry repeated, committing it. You'll know it when you feel it, Mrs. Kitely said. It feels like a doorway that's only a doorway on one side. Then her eyes moved, deliberate, to his forehead, to the lightning seam under his fringe, and her carefulness went 1 degree more careful, a note he was too young to fully read and filed anyway. "And 4, since I see you've brought a lodger, don't you go feeding that." Harry put his hand up to his scar. It was just his scar, the oldest fact about him, item 1 on the list of things wrong with Harry Potter. "What is it?" he asked. "Not my parish," said Mrs. Kitely, "and not your errand yet, and I'll say no more about it in the open air. It's asleep, and it's little, and mind, it is not you, whatever it whispers when you're older. Now." Briskly reopening her handbag, which contained, and would only ever contain, a ghost of a rail timetable and a ghost of a boiled sweet. "It's coming on for your tea time, and hungry children make poor listeners. You'll come back when it suits, not Tuesdays. Tuesdays the vicar does his rounds, and I like to watch him lose the thread of his sermon." "Thank you," Harry said, and then, standing with care, having thought about Rule 2 the whole length of her speech, "Mrs. Alma Kitely." The chestnut tree moved, though the evening had no wind in it. All down the yard, faint silver at the height of the grass, something turned over the whole page, and Mrs. Kitely sat perfectly still on her tomb with her hands on her handbag, and the nutcracker face did not change and changed. "Off home," she said. "Mind the gate. The dreams began that Sunday. They were not dreams in the usual inventory. His usual dreams were a cupboard child's dreams. Green light, a motorbike falling forever, doors that shrank. These arrived with the smell of river stones and snuffed candles, and in them he stood in the round chamber under the mound, except that in dreaming it had no ceiling. It went up into a night sky whose stars were arranged in ledger columns, and the dark river ran wider, and the voice was waiting for him each time like a lesson set out on a desk. "You cannot yet read," said the voice without reproach the first night, "so we will not begin with reading. We will begin where the line began before letters. We will begin with the naming of the dead." "Mrs. Kitely says names are payment," Harry said. A pause. Then, in the braid of the voice, unmistakable, a dry ripple of what in a living throat would have been laughter. "The yards keep the old law better than the manors ever did," it said. "Yes. Names are payment, and remembrance is the paying of them. And here is the first thing that is asked of you, little heir, the first of the 3 accountings, and the only one I will set you while you are 6. You will learn the names of your dead, not the lines dead. That ledger would outlast your life in the reading. Your dead, the near ones, the ones whose account bought yours. A child who cannot name his mother is a door with no hinge, nothing true can be hung on him. Do you know your mother's name? The question went through Harry like the dog bite, specific and deep. Mum, he said, and then from a place he did not know he had from under 6 years of the voice that discussed drains. Lily, Aunt Petunia said at once, at the sink, she was cross after. He stood in the dream with his fists at his sides. Lily, is that right? Nobody ever says. They say don't ask questions. I asked what my dad was called and Uncle Vernon said trouble, and Dudley laughed for about a year. The river ran. The columned stars stood over him. When the voice came again, it had lowered itself to sit, an old man lowering himself onto a bench beside a child, and it said, then hear what your own blood cannot be bothered to tell you, and what every stone in that valley has by heart. Your mother was Lily Potter, born Evans. Your father was James Potter, only son of Fleamont and Euphemia. The names came slow and weighted, coins counted into a hand. Fleamont, who was teased for his name into being twice the wand his tormentors were, and made a fortune in a bottle and gave most of it away. Euphemia, who at 70 took in her son's hunted friends as though the war were a dinner party running long. Henry, your great-grandfather, who stood up in the wizards' parliament and shamed them for hiding while muggles died in the mud, and was called a traitor to wizard-kind for it, and wore the name like a buttonhole. Doria of the House of Black, who married in against both families, better judgment and was worth the trouble. And before them and beside them, back and back, Ilanth, who carried the cloak and the keeping of it out of our name and into yours when the last Peverell son died with only stone for issue. These are near dead and old dead both, and you will not hold them all at once, and you are not asked to. You are asked to begin. I can't write them, Harry said. The confession burned worse than any of Marge's speeches. I can write Harry and Cat and some others. I'm only in class 2. Then you will say them, said the voice, and the dream chamber turned with him, presenting the dark river, patient, moving. Say them into the water, one each night, and the water will hold them for you until you can hold them yourself. This is not magic, little air, or it is the magic everything else is a poor copy of. The whole craft of our line, the wards, the rites, the quiet arts, the fearful call necromancy, and the wise call housekeeping, every stone of it stands on this one law: what is named is kept. Death is not the opposite of that. Death is where the naming is tested. So Harry Potter, 6 years old, stood on a stone lip over the water under a sky of filed stars and said, Lily Potter, and watched the name go into the river like a struck match going into velvet, a brief bright seam taken under, not put out. He woke in the bolted cupboard with tears dried at his temples and the sock in his fist, and lay listening to the house tick, and found that the morning's first thought had changed. Every morning of his remembered life, the first thought had been a weather report. What mood is the house in? This morning the first thought was Lily Potter, and the house's mood came second, and never again in his life did it come first. James Potter went into the river on Monday night, and the water did a thing with his father's name it had not done with his mother. The bright seam, going under, kicked. A flick at the surface, quick, insolent, a fish jumping for the joy of the jump, and the braided voice made its dry ripple and said, he was like that, and Harry carried he was like that around for days, privately, the first thing he had ever owned about his father that was not the word trouble. Fleamont went in on Tuesday. Euphemia on Wednesday. He liked her best after James and Lily, because of the dinner party running long. Henry on Thursday, Doria on Friday, and Ilanth he saved for Sunday, because she felt like the hinge the door of all of it hung on. On Wednesday after school he went back to the yard. Mrs. Kitely was at her post on the chest tomb, watching a blackbird bully a worm, and she heard out his report of the week, the river, the names, the columned stars, with the occasional short nod of a woman checking work against a standard she had not expected the work to meet. Remembrance first, she said. Your hill has manners, I'll give it that. That's the right order, and the churches had it once too, before they got embarrassed. You'll want to know about the yard then, since it's to be your trade. Pay attention and don't gawp. And she took him down the rows like a landlady showing the property. Hobbs, under the table tomb with the railings, died 1712, sexton here, man and boy, he dug half the yard he lies in, and if he came up to look at you, child, that's the parish equivalent of a state visit. The Marchbank sisters under the twin stones by the tap, who had not spoken to each other since 1899 over a disputed hatpin, and had continued not speaking with tremendous energy ever since. The plot by the north wall, grassed and unmarked, where she stopped and stood a moment and said only, parish graves. Nobody bought them stones. You might say their names down your river some night when you've a vacancy. There's a list in the vestry book. I'll spell it for you when your letters come in. Why do you stay? Harry asked her at the north wall. You and Hobbs and the sisters, if the water carries everyone, why are you still here? That, said Mrs. Kitely, is the one question the living always ask, and it's the one that's rude. You'll learn the shape of everyone's reasons by and by without asking. Reasons float up like handbags in floods. She resettled hers on her lap. Some stay for spite. The Marchbanks would go tomorrow if either could bear the other getting the last of the yard. Some stay for love, which holds harder than spite and wears better. Hobbs stays because he can't credit the new sexton with the drainage, and between you and me the drainage bears him out. And some of us, her chin came up a fraction, the felt flower steady, stay because we choose it and our reasons are our own, and that's all the answer you'll be getting, young Peverell, so don't spend your luck asking twice. She showed him one more thing before he went, the war memorial inside the lich gate and the brass plate on the church wall, roll of remembrance 1939-1945, with her own name on it 4 lines down, and she watched him find it and read it, slow, his lips moving. Almarkitely. The vicar reads that roll out once a year, she said, on the Sunday in November. Reads it like a shopping list, 40 names in 50 seconds, no more weight on one than another. Dereliction, I call it. A name said properly is a wage, and a name said carelessly is a slap, and most of the living can't tell the difference and never learn there is one. Her eyes came round to him. You'll be the other kind, or I've wasted a Wednesday. And one thing more, since you're mine to spoil now. News travels down the water, child. Every yard in England sits over the same river, the one your hill keeps a door to, and the water carries more than names. The night your door opened, this whole yard felt the draft, and if we felt it here, it was felt in other places, by other kinds of thing that listen. Not all of them lean downhill as sweetly as we do. There was a man came through this yard once in the 50s in a good coat, offering the dead errands. The yard has never once said his name since, and the yard forgets nothing, so you can weigh what that means. When somebody finds you, and somebody will, you look at what they want first. Everyone who comes to you the rest of your life will want something. The good ones will say so. And in the days between being 6 and thorough, he did the other thing, the thing that would detonate the weak. He decided the names should exist above the water too, in pencil, in the world. His dead had been kept in the dark by everyone who owed them daylight, and he had a 50-pence word for what that was now, because Mrs. Kitely had supplied it during Wednesday's visit, apropos of the vicar, dereliction. He did it at school, at wet play, on a half-sheet of rough paper with the blue pencil that still had a point. It took 2 sessions and terrible concentration and 1 consultation with Mrs. Bright about, how do you spell F sounds, miss? And when it was done, it was 7 names in a column in enormous wobbling capitals, 3 of them misspelled, 1 heartbreakingly euphemised. And he folded it into eighths and put it where he put everything, in the sock, with the soldier and the marble and the bottle top and the stone that knew the river roads. Petunia found it on Saturday. She was not snooping, that was the miserable geometry of it. Saturday was sheet day, and the cot got stripped like everything got stripped, and Harry came in from weeding the border at 11 o'clock with dirt to his wrists, and found his aunt standing in the hall outside the open cupboard with the sock inverted on the floor and the paper open in her hands, unfolded to its full eighth crease size, and on her face, caught there because he had come in too quietly, an expression with no household use at all. The sum finished and the total wrong, a face that had stopped seeing paper and started seeing a window with something coming through it. Where did you hear these? Petunia said. Her voice had no volume in it, arithmetic fast under the fringe. The truth was 33 steps down a hill she must never learn existed. School was checkable. Mrs. Figg was checkable. People say things, Harry said, at the shops about people's families. And then, watching her face the specific close way you watch whether that could go either direction, he took the coin he had been carrying for a week and spent it deliberately to see what it bought. Euphemia spelled wrong. I couldn't remember if it was F or PH. The paper made a sound in her hands, 1 clean crease snap like distant ice. What happened in his aunt's face over the following 3 seconds Harry catalogued and spent years decoding. First the whiteness. Then a flick of the eyes to the front door, the reflex of a woman checking who could see into her hall, though the door was shut and frosted. And then last, worst, briefest, before the shutters came down over it. Her chin moved a 1/4 inch sideways and her eyes fixed on the middle distance over his shoulder at nothing, at a garden in another decade, and her mouth opened, and what came out was not shrieked and was therefore unprecedented, because every prior mention of his mother in this house had arrived at a shriek. Petunia spelled with a PH sound too, she said. We got the same letters. Everyone always said the Evans girls, their mother loved a fancy name. She stopped. The shutters came down. He watched her hear herself, watched the hall reassemble around her. Sheet day, 11 o'clock, the boy and her spine restacked itself vertebra by vertebra into number 4's load-bearing wall, and she folded the paper twice, walked into the kitchen and put it into the fire of the gas hob with the tongs, all 4 burners clicking, and held it there until it was ash and rinsed the tongs. There are no Potters, she said to the sink with her back to him. There is no Godric's Hollow. There is nothing to spell. Get the sheets. Harry got the sheets. He carried them upstairs with his heart going quietly, steadily, like a man walking home rich through a bad neighborhood, keeping his face dull, giving nothing away to the street. She had burned 7 names. She had given him an 8th, Godric's Hollow, a place, a where. She had said there is no, in the exact voice she used for lies of policy, that there's no more biscuits voice, and Harry, holder of a week-old estate consisting of 1 hill, 1 stone, and 7 names, entered the 8th item in the ledger and noted with the accountant's corner of his head that it was the first he had ever gotten from her. That night he set it into the river with the others. The water took it differently. The names had gone in like matches into velvet, the place went in like a key going over a weir, turning slowly, catching the light, and the voice of the crypt presiding said only, "Kept." And then softer in the oldest strand of the braid, "That ground remembers us. It will matter later, little heir. Sleep." Mrs. Figg's front room smelled of boiled cabbage and cat, and Harry had spent, by conservative estimate, 300 hours of his life in it, being shown photographs of every cat Mrs. Figg had ever owned. He was deposited there the last Saturday of June while the Dursleys attended a garden center. The visit went wrong or right inside 10 minutes. Mr. Tibbles sat on the poop opposite Harry. Snowy sat on the windowsill. Tufty sat on the sideboard by the racing calendar. And all three sat facing him in a half-circle, upright, still, and stared with a fixed professional attention at his right hand, and the margin around them was not cat-shaped. It was awake in the manner of the yew hedge, and Harry looked at Mr. Tibbles, and Mr. Tibbles looked back with an intelligence no cat had any business billing him for, and Harry thought, "You're a lit window too, different curtains. Biscuit, dear," said Mrs. Figg, coming in with the tin, and stopped, teapot forward, reading the room seating plan. An old woman in carpet slippers with her hair coming out of its net, and Harry watched her make exactly the calculation Petunia had made over the pencil names, "Who can see into my hall," and watched her arrive somewhere different, somewhere sadder and more used to itself. She put the tin down. "They've been like it since Tuesday week," she said, conversational, watching him with a flinching hope, a woman flying a kite in a lull. "The night you went wandering and gave everyone such a turn. Cats are odd about some people. My grandmother always said, cats and bees, they know the house's business before the house does." A pause, one beat too long. "Nothing you want to tell an old woman about, I suppose, where you got to." The hush off his shoulder lay perfectly still. Harry looked at her over the biscuit tin, 6 years old, and conducted, in the time it took to choose a custard cream, a complete audit. Item, Mrs. Figg had never once been unkind. Item, Mrs. Figg's cabbage-smelling front room existed on the Dursleys' approved list, and nothing else in the world did, and the Dursleys approved of nothing that was good for him, and had somehow never scented that this house was a discrepancy. Item, her eyes had gone to his right hand twice, following the cat's. Item, kites want wind. Conclusion, entered with genuine regret because he was learning that his new estate had running costs. Tell no one what you cannot help. "I got lost," Harry said. "A man showed me the way back. Can I have the one with the jam?" Something crossed the old woman's face and folded itself away with a speed that said it knew its own luggage. "Course you can, dear," she said, and poured and got down the album with the photographs of Mr. Paws. And here the afternoon gave Harry something no album ever had, because he let his eyes rest just past the sideboard in the practiced manner, out into the margin, and the margin of Mrs. Figg's front room was crowded. A tortoise-shell shape lay along the top of the dresser where no living cat sat. Something with one ear kept the warm spot by the gas fire. By her slippered feet, close as a shadow keeps, a gray printed on the air cat sat upright with its tail wrapped round, facing her, in the exact attitude of the 3 living ones facing him, on duty. Mr. Paws, he thought, still in post. Nothing that was loved in this house had ever actually left it, and the house knew its own business, and the old woman turning album pages in the middle of all that silver attendance knew everything and nothing about what she kept. Harry ate his jam biscuit and let her narrate the photographs, every one, and did not hurry her. At 6 o'clock retrieved, he paused at her gate because the margin moved. At the upstairs window, Tufty watching him go. And behind the downstairs nets, visible only as a silhouette against the hall light, Mrs. Figg, already at the little telephone table where the telephone was, not lifting the receiver, but writing, fast on a pad, in the leaning, looping hand of a woman composing a letter she had been rehearsing since Tuesday week. Harry walked the 400 yards to number 4 and did the sum on the way, and it unbalanced. She would write to someone. Old women wrote to someone. It was one of their powers. But the list of someones who cared where Harry Potter got to on a Tuesday had, until 2 weeks ago, held 0 entries, and now behaved like it had held one all along. An entry senior to the Dursleys, senior to school, an entry the cats reported to, an entry that had known to rent a watcher 400 yards from his cupboard. He could not put a face to it. He noted the empty column where a face should be, and ruled a line and carried the total forward. That was also the night he learned his lodger's temper. It happened at the churchyard wall, on the last leg home, at the exact moment the street lamps came on. He had stopped to say good night to the yard, not aloud, just resting his eyes past the yew in the way that had become his version of a wave, and the margin waved back, a general silver settling hobs-deep parish-wide, and warmth came up in him like water finding a level, and for one unguarded second Harry Potter stood on a public pavement in Little Winging and was, without a single qualifying clause, glad. The scar moved, not pain or not first. First it was the feeling of being leant on from inside, a pressure at the old seam as though something in a back room had rolled over and put its shoulder to the door, and with it, through him, one pulse of an appetite that was not his, a want with no object, all mouth. And the yard silver went out like gas turned off at the main, every grave gone dark and shut, and from the top of the chest tomb where she materialized already standing, Mrs. Alma Kitely said in a voice he had never heard her use, flat as the flat of a knife, "Walk home now, child, don't run." He walked. Behind him the yard stayed dark the whole length of the hedge. The pressure faded before he reached the corner, subsiding grudgingly, a lodger going back to bed, and the pain came afterward, thin and bright along the seam, and he stood under the street lamp outside number 4 until his hands were still, because Rule 3 had a smell and he would not bring it into even this house. It is not you, he told himself in Mrs. Kitely's voice, whatever it whispers. He was not to feed it. He inventoried what it had lain toward to know what feeding was, and the answer sat him down on the curb with his arms around his knees. It had leaned when he was glad. He was quiet at supper even by the standards of a house that preferred him invisible. But in the cupboard later he took out the stone and held its riverbed cold against the scar until both went to a neutral temperature, and he set the fact in its place in the ledger with hands that had steadied. His inheritance had a squatter. The crypt had known "There's a thing in your house," said a memory of pressure at the far edge of the first dream, "a thing I will speak of when you are older." Mrs. Kitely had known, the cats presumably had known and told the pad by the telephone. Everyone knew the house's business before the house did. "Fine," Harry said to the dark evenly, a landlord concluding a file. It could wait. He was collecting rules and names in one hill, and he was 6, and the voice under the mound had promised him nothing before its time. The owl came on the 4th of July, a Friday, at 6 minutes past midnight. He knew the time because he was awake, saying "Island" into the dark for practice, and he knew the date forever afterward because of what the letter set in motion. There was no window in a cupboard under stairs. What there was a ventilation grill, and through the grill from the hall came a sound number 4 had never in its history produced at night. A tapping at the front door's glass, deliberate, spaced, patient. 3 taps, rest, 3 taps, the rhythm of a creditor confident of the debt. Then the letterbox flap creaked, held open. He heard the spring strain, and something came through it and slid across the hall parquet and lay still, and the tapping did not resume. Whatever had delivered it did not require a signature. Upstairs, Vernon's snore shredded, caught itself, resumed. Nobody woke. The house ticked. Harry lay on the cot with his eyes open in the dark and became aware, by degrees, the same way the school roof jump had announced itself in his chest, that the hall's new arrival was addressed to him. It sat in the margin like a lamp. It was, he realized with a lurch, warm, the precise inverse of the tollstone's cold, 2 ends of one register, and it was leaking its warmth under the cupboard door in a thin line of light that was not light. He got up. He put his hand flat on the door above the bolts where the wood was. The tollstone in the sock in his other hand woke. He felt it go cold to purring, the cat with no cat thrum of the valley, and along the door on the far side in the brass of 2 bolts fitted on Tuesday by a man in overalls, something turned over twice, unhurried, with the sound of a tumbler the size of a hill going over in a lock, scaled down to hallway, snick, snick. The cupboard door swung open onto the dark hall of number 4, Privet Drive, and stood there ajar, matter of fact, like it had never in its life been anything but a door. "Tolls are dear," the warden had said, and once between each visit home, and Harry stood on the threshold in Dudley's old pajamas doing the sum even now, even trembling. He had not spent the once. He had not asked. The stone had not taken him anywhere. It had simply, with the punctilious courtesy of the very old toward the very correct, declined to let a bolt stand between the last of the line and his post. The envelope lay on the parquet in a lozenge of street lamp from the door glass. Parchment, real, heavy as cloth, no stamp. His name on the front in ink that shone too dark, in handwriting like fence wire. Mr. H. J. Potter, the cupboard under the STAIRS, and there his address stopped being an address and became an accusation. He covered the second line with his thumb and turned it over. The seal was black wax, deep as the slab in the valley, and pressed into the wax, sharp as the day of its carving, a triangle, a circle, a line. And beneath the mark, in letters raised so fine he read them with his fingertip, a single word that he could not have read a month ago and read now without hesitation, because the water had been holding his lessons too, GRINGOTTS. He sat back on his heels on the cold parquet and considered the word. He did not know what a Gringotts was. But the seal knew the mark, and the mark was his, and whatever had walked up the path of number 4 at midnight, and tapped 3 times with the confidence of a creditor, had used the crypt's own sign to do it, which meant the loud world the warden promised had not merely heard the door open. Some part of it had known the address of the heir down to the cupboard, and had wanted him to see that it knew the whole accusation of that second line. They know where you sleep, and they know what your family is, and they wrote both on one envelope and posted it anyway. He did not open it in the hall. Some documents tell you where they are to be opened. This one wanted a door closed behind it. He carried it into the cupboard and pulled the door to, and heard the bolts, courteous, punctilious, slide themselves home behind him. Snick, snick, the cage locking itself around the only person in the house with a key. Under the blanket, by the light of the envelope's own not light, Harry Potter broke the black seal, and the wax parted down the line of the mark the same direction the hill had. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The deep doors. The letter, unfolded under the blanket, said this, in ink that sat on the parchment like wet slate: to the bearer of the mark of the three, greetings. On the night of the 17th of June, the deep doors of this bank sealed these 7 centuries by compact with the house of Peverell Opned of themselves. The bank has waited 11 days upon the customary dignities. The bank now writes: present yourself at the trader's door at sunrise on the 5th of July. The stone you carry knows the road and the toll is waived. The bank has standing to waive it, which is one of the matters the bank will explain. Come alone or come accompanied. The bank advises alone, and the bank's advice on the point of whom to trust is worth more than its weight in anything. No fee attaches to this summons. The bank wishes the point minutid, as it will not recur. GRNUK, keeper of standing instructions, GRINGOTTS. Harry read it 4 times, mouthing the hard words, and the letter helped him. Where his reading failed, the warmth in the parchment steadied under his fingertip, and the word came up through it, the water holding his lesson still. Sunrise on the 5th of July was, he calculated, tomorrow. He lay in the dark and audited the thing from every side, in the manner Mrs. Kitely would have called counting the spoons before the guests arrive. Someone knew where he slept down to the cupboard and had chosen to show him so. That cut both directions, threat or credential. The letter asked for nothing. It waived a fee he hadn't known existed. It advised him in writing to trust no one, including by implication itself, which was either honesty or very good manners pretending to be honesty. And it had said of themselves about the deep doors, in the passive voice of an institution registering, with faint institutional outrage, an event it had not authorized. The good ones will say so, Mrs. Kitely had said about wanting. The bank had said so. The bank wanted to explain and to minute things, and he turned the letter over. On the reverse, in the same fence-wire hand, one final line stood alone. The bank wanted this. The bank asks the bearer to bring nothing and to touch nothing on the road. The road will offer. The road always offers. Decline. Sunrise in July came before 5. He was awake for it, dressed in the least strong of Dudley's old clothes, standing on his cot with the stone in his fist, and he had thought carefully about the mechanics, because the letter said the stone knew the road, and the only road the stone had ever taken him was the one that felt like dusk taking a garden. He put his free hand flat on the cupboard wall for steadiness and said quietly to the stone, feeling 6 and enormous both at once, Gringotts, please, the trader's door. The cupboard filled with the sound of water that was not there. Then the river road took him, and this time, going deliberately, awake, unbloodied, he could attend to it, and it was this. Not travel but descent, a going under, the world tipping sideways the way light tips at the bottom of a swimming pool, and a passage along something enormous and patient that ran beneath little winging and beneath everything, with doors in its banks the whole way down. Pale doors, dark doors, doors of root and doors of brick, one of gnawed bone that he was careful not to look at twice, and things at the thresholds of some of them, watching him go by with long attention, and one door ajar, breathing out the smell of a birthday cake, from behind which a voice that was almost Petunia's said his name kindly. The road will offer. He kept his eyes on the middle of the water and declined. The road set him down on stone. He was in a courtyard the size of the Dursleys' garden, sunk below street level somewhere loud. Above the courtyard's rim, out of sight, a city was making its morning noises, iron shutters, hooves, a kettle whistle, and the sky overhead was London-colored. The courtyard held a well, long dry, from whose depths the last of the river road, not light, was still draining, and a single door of black iron in a wall of white marble gone grey at the seams, a door with no handle, no knocker, and no keyhole, and before the door, on a 3-legged stool, sat a goblin. Harry had never seen a goblin. He catalogued fast from behind the fringe, shorter than him by a head and wider, skin like a walnut shell, a suit of clerical black cut better than anything Vernon owned, ears that came to points and moved, indexing the courtyard sounds separately the whole time, eyes with no white worth mentioning, black and bright and entirely awake at an hour when nothing respectable was, and fingers, very long, laced over one knee, that looked capable of tying knots in the idea of string. On the stool beside him lay a ledger bound in grey hide, shut, and on the ledger lay his other hand, flat, in the attitude of a man keeping a hand on a dog. The goblin looked at Harry and then at Harry's right hand, and Harry watched the black eyes find the mark under the seam with no searching at all, the courtyard's dim going 1 degree dimmer around them, and the goblin got down off the stool and did a thing that Harry, replaying it for years, never got to the bottom of. He took off with both hands a small black cap Harry hadn't registered him wearing, and held it to his chest for exactly 1 breath and put it back on. It had the look of a gesture out of a very old drawer, unfolded for the occasion and folded away at once, and his face while he did it was not friendly and was not servile. It was correct, with a correctness that had cost dead men something somewhere once. The bearer comes on time, the goblin said. His voice was gravel, sordid, fine. Gornuk, keeper of standing instructions. There are 140 of them concerning your house, bearer, and until the 17th of June it was this keeper's opinion that they were 140 ways for a clerk to waste a lifetime. The bank enjoys being wrong about a waste. It happens seldom. He looked Harry over once, collar, shoes, the mended sleeve, and where every prior adult audit had ended in a glance away or a sum gone sour, Gornuk's ended in the ledger being picked up and the stool being kicked, economically, aside. You came alone, the bank advised alone, Harry said. The bank's advice seemed, he hunted the word, found one of Mrs. Kitely's, disinterested. Something happened at the hinge of the goblin's jaw, rapidly suppressed. The bearer has had good counsel from somewhere already, Gornuk said. The bank is pleased. The bank had prepared several speeches for a bearer who arrived with an entourage, and they were fine speeches, wasted now every one. He put one long finger not on the iron door but on the marble beside it. Before the door opens, 3 matters spoken in the open air where the walls are mine and the witnesses are none. First, what waits below is the bank's oldest live compact, and it is senior. The bearer should hear the word in his bones. Senior to every charter this bank holds with the Ministry of Magic, with the wizards Wisengamot, and with the crowned muggles before them. When wizards and goblins were killing one another with enthusiasm, bearer 3 times your house's compact stood. It stood because it is not a compact with wizards. It is a compact with an account that does not close. Second, the bank will use certain words this morning, Air Master Lord. The bank uses words the way it uses weights because the scale demands them. The bearer is advised not to enjoy them. Enjoyment corrodes the scale. Third, the black eyes came up. There are goblins below, old ones of the deep roads service, who have waited their entire careers in a silence your kind has never once respected, for a door their fathers told them would never open. When they look at you, they will not be looking at a wizard child. Do not act like one. What should I act like? Harry asked. It seemed the practical question. Gornuk considered him for a moment that had arithmetic in it. Act like what the seal says you are, he said, and the bank will manage the rest, and he laid his palm flat on the iron, and the door that had no handle, no knocker, and no keyhole remembered, with a sound like a ward going over in a lock the size of a bank, that it was a door. They went down. That was the organizing fact of Gringotts that no one had ever put in a letter. The marble hall Harry glimpsed only from a gallery above, chandeliers and scales and a floor like a frozen lake, was the bank's smile, and everything true about the institution happened beneath it, in rock. A cart took them the first stretch on rails through torchlit dark that smelled of cold iron and deeper water, and Gornuk sat beside him with the grey ledger on his knees and named nothing, and the dark went by full of doors. The cart stopped where the rails stopped, at a barrier Harry understood at once he was going to dream about. A wall of falling water across the whole tunnel, thin as a curtain, lit from nowhere, falling without splash or spray into a grate of black metal, and it made no sound. Water in any quantity makes sound. This made the opposite. It subtracted sound from the air around it, and the torches nearest it burned silently, and Gornuk's voice, when he spoke, arrived flattened, all its gravel muffled to felt. The thief's downfall, he said. It washes away every enchantment, every disguise, every borrowed face. The bank passes all deep roads traffic through it. All bearer, there are no exceptions, and there is no discourtesy. The downfall falls on directors. Will it wash my mark off? Harry asked. The question had been building since the tunnel mouth. No, said Gornuk, with the crispness of a goblin who has just been paid a professional pleasure. It will do the opposite, walk through slowly. The deep road service is watching, and they have waited a long time, and you may as well give them their money's worth. Harry walked through slowly. The water was cold in the manner of the toll stone rather than the manner of weather, and it went through him rather than over him, one clean page turn from crown to shoes, and everything false he had on him died in the crossing, which cost him nothing, because a cupboard child in a dead bully's cast-offs is carrying remarkably little that is false. What he was carrying came on with him. The seam on his palm lit under the falling water and did not go out, and the mark beneath the seam surfaced plain, for anyone with the right sort of eyes, triangle and circle and line burning quiet as a struck match cupped against the dark. And from the shadows beyond the curtain, where the tunnel opened into a vault of natural rock, there came a sound Harry would set beside the crypt's first word in the museum of his life. The sound of 40 goblins of the deep road service, arrayed in 2 silent ranks with pikes grounded, going down on one knee, iron and leather and old bone all together once. It was not a soft sound, nothing about it was soft, it rang. Harry stopped dead in the middle of the ranks, dripping not water, 6 years old, and did the only thing his whole strange new estate had actually trained him for. He thought of Gornuk's third matter, and of the stone lords with their eyelashes and calluses, and of what the seal said he was, and he did not enjoy it, and did not perform, and did not shrink. He stood still and let them look, the same as he had stood in the reading light of the crypt, present, level, answerable. Then he said into the ringing silence, clear as he could pitch it, "Thank you for waiting." Afterward, in the long inventory of things Harry Potter did without knowing what he was doing, this one kept its place near the top. He had meant it simply. They had waited, their fathers had waited, waiting deserved thanks, the yard had taught him wages. He could not know, and Gornuck did not tell him for years, that the phrase he had chosen, rendered exact in gobbledygook, was the closing formula of the old compact itself, the words the first Peverell had spoken over the first sealed door, and that every goblin in that vault had it by heart the way Mrs. Kitely had the roll of remembrance, and that the sound that went down the two ranks when he said it, a click of 40 pike hafts angling as one, was the deep road service answering a call sign across 700 years. The account is open, the bearer knows the words, we are not keeping an empty room after all. The door warden of the deep came forward to walk them the last stretch. Bodrig, oldest goblin Harry would ever meet, white-tufted, one ear gone to some story nobody offered, moving with 2 sticks and refusing, with visible relish, the arm of every younger goblin who hovered. He looked at Harry's palm and then at Harry for a long moment up and down twice. Small, he delivered finally in a voice like a drawer of flints. He is 6, said Gornuck. The door is 700, said Bodrig unanswerably, and turned and led them down the last passage, at the bottom of which the torches gave up and the light became the other kind, low and colorless along the floor seams, crypt light, home light, and the passage opened out, and there was the river. It was wider here than under the mound. It came out of one darkness and went into another, and it ran through the roots of Gringotts the way a keel runs through a ship, the true structural member, everything else built to it. And on its near bank stood a wharf of black stone worn hollow by centuries of feet, and at the wharf, tied by a chain that was not a chain but a written line, a sentence in the crypt's spiral letters holding the shape of links, floated a ferry the size of a rowing boat, oarless, gray as the ledger's hide. On the far bank, cut into the living rock, ringed by the low colorless light, doors, the deep doors, 9 of them that Harry could count, of 9 makes and 9 ages, and 8 were shut in a manner that ended the subject, and one barrow-shaped lintel and 2 uprights, the mark of the 3 cut deep in the capstone, stood open. The ferry crossed without being told. The written chain paid itself out link by link, sentence by sentence, and the black water ran under the hull with no wake at all, and Harry sat in the middle of the boat with his hands in his lap and felt the river notice him the whole width of the crossing, a pressure of attention from underneath, unhostile, immense, like lying on the floor above a room where your name is being spoken. Bodrig stood in the bow with both sticks planted, facing forward, and Gornuck sat in the stern with the ledger facing back, and neither goblin looked at the water once, which taught Harry more about the water than looking would have. 7 centuries, said Gornuck to the open door, professionally aggrieved, and it did not send a memorandum. The vault of the house of Peverell was not a room of gold. Harry, who by then had gathered from 100 small tells that money was somewhere in the morning's spine, walked through the barrow door braced for treasure the way children brace for treasure, and got instead a long low hall of shelves and stands and chests, lit like the crypt, ordered like a vestry, and understood within 4 steps that he was in a place where things were kept in the churchyard sense. This was not wealth. This was remembrance with a door on it. There were grave goods, cups and combs and torques, a child's wooden horse worn faceless by handling, laid up in niches with nameplates in the spiral letters, and where his reading failed the warmth came up through the plates and helped him, this whole vault one patient teacher. There were weapons, few, all sheathed, all facing the wall, retired in some way he could feel across the room. There were books, 2 long walls of them, gray hide and black, from tomes the size of paving slabs down to duodecimos you could post through a letterbox, and where the plates offered titles the warmth spelled them out for him, patient as Mrs. Bright with the slow readers, on the courtesies owed to the dead, the Ferryman's Arithmetic, a treatise of thresholds, fords, stiles, and other places where the toll is taken. Against necromancy, which is theft, being 300 pages by the heft of it, of a house explaining with visible contempt what it was not. He could read none of them yet, and wanted, with a want that had teeth, to read all of them, and one shelf sat at exactly a 6-year-old's eye height, where somebody 700 years ago or 11 days ago had set a hornbook, a paddle of pale wood with a page of letters set into it under a skin of horn, the alphabet ranked round the mark of the 3, and under the alphabet, in a child's own carving, uneven, ancient, the letters IP. Ignatus's son cut his letters on that. Said Gornuck from the doorway where the goblins had stopped, there was a line in the floor at the threshold, and their side of the morning ended at it. Or Ignatus cut them as a boy. The plates disagree, and the plates never disagree, so the bank concludes the vault wishes the point ambiguous, a pause with arithmetic in it. It was on the 3rd shelf, spine inward, until the door opened. The bank finds it at eye height this morning, whose eye height bearer the bank invites you to notice. Harry took the hornbook down with both hands. It weighed what it should, which by now he knew enough to find remarkable. The horn was warm. The vault gave him 3 more things, or led him to them. The low light gathering along floor seems to a shelf here, a stand there, hospitable, unhurried. And the first was the ledgers, the near wall's whole lower course. The account of the house in your books going back past numbering and open on a reading stand at the row's end, its page freshly turned by nobody, the current volume where entries stood in the fence wire hand of the bank interleaved with entries in a hand that was no hand at all, spiral letters laid on the parchment like frost forming, and the last entry but one read, 17 June. The door is opened. The seal is answered. The heir is found, WIGHED, and marked, Harry of the line of IGNOTUS, master of death by blood, by crossing, and by the word of the crypt. And the last entry dated that morning in frost still forming as he watched, 5 July. He came alone and thanked the watch for waiting. The second thing was the empty stand. It stood in the place a hearth would stand in a house, centered on the hall's long wall, carved of the same black basalt as the slab under the mound, and it was a stand for a garment, shoulders of stone, spread wide and nothing on them. The dust of the vault, which lay elsewhere in a fur of centuries, would not settle on the stand at all. It stood polished by its own refusal, keeping the shape of what belonged there, and on the plate at its base above the spiral letters, the bank's fence wire hand had added, at some point in the last 700 years, with the passionless completeness of a good clerk, 3 lines, the cloak of the third brother. Removed from vault B.Y.J. Potter, 1977, by right of blood, right acknowledged. Released on loan B.Y.J. Potter to APWBD, 1981, for study, term 1 month, and beneath, in frost, the month is long. Harry stood in front of the empty shoulders for a time. Nobody hurried. The vault's warmth stayed level under his hand when he touched the plate. The frost hand held no anger he could feel, only accountancy, the patient tallying of a thing away from its place. And he thought of pale doors and dark doors in the riverbanks, and of Mr. Ellery's hand going down at 3:15 to the height of a remembered head, and he asked the hall out loud because the hall had answered everything else. Who's APWBD? Frost formed on the ledger's open page, unhurried, 4 words, ask HIM for it. The third thing was in a case by the door, laid on gray cloth, a ring. Silver gone the color of moonlit lead, its band cut in the shape of the written chain, link sentences running round, its face a flat seal face, blank, no mark on it at all. It was, the plate said, the heiress seal uncut, cut by no Smith, the face takes the mark when the heir takes the house. It was made for an adult's hand, and Harry, reading the plate twice, did not reach for it, and out of the corner of his attention he saw Gornuck at the threshold, note the not reaching in the manner of a keeper minuting something for a file marked provisionally satisfactory. It would not have fit, Gornuck said, as they crossed back over the black water. The bank has seen men break their fingers trying. It wasn't mine yet, Harry said. It said so on the plate. The bank, said Gornuck to the river generally, notes that the age of the claimant and the quality of the claim continue to bear no relation whatever, which the bank has said in committee for 200 years. The business happened above, in a room off the gallery with a door that Gornuck shut, a round table too tall for Harry until it wasn't, adjusting itself with a grinding shrug of stone that Harry chose to find polite, and files. Real files, wizard parchment, bank issue in the morning's spine laid out plain. The bank now explains the wave toll, Gornuck said, and other matters. Attend bearer because some of this is money and money is boring and the parts of it that concern you are not. The House of Potter maintains at this bank a trust vault, funded for your schooling in minority, and a family vault, sealed to your majority. Both are intact. A black glance up. The bearer will meet in the loud world persons who insinuate otherwise because insinuation is cheap and audits are not. The bank states for the minute, intact to the nut. The bank counts. It is what the bank is for. What is not intact, and here Gornuck drew out a single page and turned it to face Harry, is the architecture around you. Item. The last will and testament of James and Lily Potter, lodged at this bank and duplicate lodged at the ministry, was sealed by order of the Wisengamot in November of 1981 on the motion of its chief warlock, citing the disorders of the time. Sealed bearer, not read, not executed. The bank holds its copy still, shut by wizard law. The bank is charter bound to observe above ground. The bank observes it. The bank observes many things. Item. The same instrument that sealed the will conferred upon the same chief warlock the office of your magical guardian. No court reviewed the appointment. The times were cited. Your magical guardian has, in 4 years and 8 months, communicated with this bank concerning you on 3 occasions, each to confirm that no other party had communicated with this bank concerning you. Item. Gornuck's finger, very long, came to rest on the page, on a line Harry could read himself now, and did, while the goblin said it aloud with a keeper's neutrality, which is a neutrality with a blade in it. The bank is not permitted to read the sealed will to you. The bank is permitted to state what is lodged in its own intake registry from 1977, when the will was drawn, amended, and witnessed, because intake registries are bank records, not testaments. The registry records the testator's declared instruction to the intake clerk, entered verbatim as required. It is 1 sentence. He did not read it. He turned the registry book around instead and let Harry read it in his mother's own recorded words taken down by a clerk 9 years ago. Under no circumstances is our son to be placed with my sister Petunia Dursley. The room was quiet the way the downfall was quiet. Harry read the sentence 3 times. He was aware of his own breathing, and of the mended place on his sleeve against the table's stone, and of a cold going through him that was not the tollstone-esque cold, having no courtesy in it anywhere. Who knew? He asked finally. Level, the accountant's corner holding, the intake clerk who is dead of age, the witnesses to the will of whom the bank may name none while the seal stands. The chief warlock who moved the seal, said Gornuck, either knew or possessed the means to know and preferred otherwise. The bank does not read minds, the bank reads filing behavior, and filing behavior bearer is a language with no idioms. He drew the page back. The bank makes no accusation. The bank observes that a door was locked, and observes who held the key, and observes where the child the door concerned has slept these 5 years. The bearer asked the vault a question this morning. The vault's answer serves here also. Ask him for it. Now, said Gornuck, sitting back, the bank's wants. The bank warned you the words would come, so here they are weighed. Under the old compact, this bank is banker to the house of Peverell and servant of its account, which is not an account of money. When the deep doors stand open, the compact is live, and the bank's obligations run to the bearer: passage, custody, counsel, and discretion, the 4 old duties, of which you have had 3 since sunrise and the 4th since the 17th of June, whether the bank liked it or not. What the bank asks in return is what it has always asked: standing. When the loud world moves against you, and it has begun to move, the bearer roots his affairs through the bank, and the bank is seen to be what the compact says it is. That is all. Goblins have died keeping this account, bearer, in years when your ministry was hanging us for sport, and no goblin regnant has ever explained why to a wizard, and this keeper is not going to start. Take the terms or take advice on them. I'll take advice, said Harry, if the advice is yours. The advice is take the terms, said Gornuck, and the hinge of his jaw went again briefly before discipline arrived. Minute it, and the last matter, the pressing one, you are 6. The compact knows what you are. Wizard law knows only what you appear, and what you appear is a minor with a guardian whose filing behavior the bank has just read to you. You require a steward, an adult of the wizarding world appointed under bank seal, empowered to act for the house in daylight before courts and ministries, answerable to you through the bank and owing nothing to nobody else. The bank maintains a list. The bank's list is short because the bank's standards are the bank's own. He produced it, 1 page, 5 names. The bank will summon whomever the bearer indicates, and the bank will have them under seal and oath by tea time, because the bank moves at the speed of its interest, and its interest this morning is total. Harry looked at the 5 names for a long time, sounding them in his head: Ogden, Bones, Macmillan, Tonks, Shaffick. He was 6, he had no politics, he asked the only questions he had, which were a child's, which were, on this one morning with this one list, precisely the right ones, which of them had lost people, and which of them said the names. Gornuck answered each without consulting anything. On the 4th name he said, Tonks, 2 of them, wizard and witch, married. She was born of the house of Black and burned off its tree for marrying him. The bank holds the tapestry work order that did it, and notes she has never once petitioned for reinstatement. He is Muggle-born, first wizard of his line, and files the cleanest paper the bank sees from either side of that divide. They lost her family living, which is its own kind of dead bearer. The bank sees it in ledgers oftener than you'd think. And in the war they hid people in their house, which the bank knows because the people they hid banked here, and 3 of them died later anyway, and the Tonkses paid for the stones. A pause. Say the names, you asked. The bank's agent attended one of those funerals on escrow business. Andromeda Tonks read the eulogy. The bank's agent minuted 1 word of assessment, which the bank will now disclose in full exact. Her name S. Andromeda, Harry said. Andromeda, said Gornuck. Harry thought that's a star name, and thought of stars filed in ledger columns over a dark river, and thought in the 6-year-old chamber of the committee where the deciding votes were cast. Dromeda sounds like a dragon, like a thing with wings that reads eulogies exactly. Her, he said, them, please, they came by tea time. The bank moved at the speed of its interest. Harry was fed while he waited at the tall then not tall table, by a young goblin who brought a tray without being visibly asked. Bread still warm, cheese, apples cut the way you decut them for somebody small, and a cake of a kind he didn't know with honey in its architecture somewhere, and he ate all of it slowly in the manner of a child banking calories against later confiscation, and Gornuck watched him do it over the rim of a file and minuted something, and did not say what. Andromeda Tonks arrived the way weather fronts arrive, pressure first. He heard her in the gallery before the door opened, not loud, a low even voice at speed, dismantling some procedural objection, and then the door and then her, tall, dark-haired in robes of deep gray cut with the same better-than-Vernon precision as Gornuck's suit, a face made of good bones, pale, with heavy-lidded eyes that gave her a look of drowsing and were, he saw at once, the most awake things in the room. Behind her came a big sandy man with his coat over his arm, mid-40s, built like the kindest wall in England, who filled the doorway and then, seeing the size of what was sitting at the table, quietly took his hat off. Andromeda Tonks stopped 2 paces in. Her eyes went over Harry the professional way: collar, shoes, elbows, the mended sleeve, wrists, the shadow under the cheekbone, the flint radius he kept around adults without knowing he kept it. It was Petunia's audit and Mrs. Kitely's audit and Gornuck's audit, and it was none of them, because when this one finished, the sum went somewhere he had never once watched a sum go. Her chin came down a half-inch, her mouth went still. The heavy lids came fully up, and what stood in her eyes, precise and banked, was an old fury being handed a new file. "Mr. Potter," she said, exact as billed, "my name is Andromeda Tonks. This is my husband, Ted. We are told the house of Peverell has need of a steward." Her eyes didn't leave him. "Before oaths, I have one question, and I'll have it answered by somebody in this room who has had the keeping of this child." "Inc," said Gornuck, dry as flint, "invites the steward candidate to review the file in which the bank has flagged that very question in the bank's way." "Which is numbered items," said Gornuck, "and no adjectives." Ted Tonks pulled out the chair beside Harry, not across beside, and sat his big frame down on it and put his hat on the table brim up, like a man declaring no further concealments, and looked at the remains of the tray with serious approval. "They gave you the honey cake," he said. "They've never given me the honey cake, 14 years of faithful custom." He extended one enormous hand, unhurried, palm sideways, an offer with all its terms visible. "Ted, solicitor, I do the boring parts, and with this bank the boring parts are life-threatening." Harry shook it. His hand vanished to the wrist and came back unharmed, which was, he understood dimly, the entire message. And then, because the room's arithmetic had already run ahead to its total, because the door had knelt open for him, and the ledger had frosted his mornings into its permanent record, and the fence wire and the frost both said this was his to decide, because she had asked who has had the keeping of this child with a fury that was for him and not at him, which he could tell apart at 40 paces, being a connoisseur, because Ted's hand had made its offer with the terms visible. And because the crypt had said be slow to help it, and he had been slow all morning, slow and correct, and audited every step, Harry Potter reached into the sock he was not supposed to have brought, and took out a river-worn stone that answered every falling of the light like the last of an evening, and set it on the table between the three of them unasked. "I'm Harry," he said. "This is the true bit. Somebody should see it before they promise anything." The stone lay on the bank's stone and purred its cat with no cat cold, and Andromeda Tonks looked at it and went, if possible, more exact, and Ted Tonks looked at it and then at Harry and did not touch it, which was right, and nobody in the room enjoyed the words, and the scale thus far held. The oaths took 20 minutes and were the least boring thing Harry had ever witnessed. Gornuck administered them across the gray ledger, open now to a fresh leaf. The wording ran old and plain: service to the house, account before advantage, the child's good above the client's convenience. And at the line answerable to the bearer through the bank, Andromeda Tonks paused, looked across the table at a 6-year-old in a dead bully's shirt, and said the words directly to him rather than to the book, which the book, frosting quietly, recorded as done. Then she was a steward, and stewarding began on the spot, in numbered items, no adjectives. Item: a healer, bank cleared, discreet to see him within the week, because 5 years was a long time between anyone competent looking at him, and she had counted his wrists from 2 paces. Item: clothes that had been bought for him and no one previous, delivered plainly, nothing that would start questions in little winging. Item: a weekly visit, Saturdays, under cover the bank would furnish. Solicitors, Ted observed, hat still brim up, made wonderfully boring cover, there being no surveillance in England that could stay awake through one. Item: and here her voice went most level of all, nothing else changes yet, not the house, not the cupboard, not the bolts, though her quill pressed near through the parchment on the word. If we move you tonight, Mr. Potter, we lose you by Christmas to whatever instrument sealed that will. We move once, we move with the bank's whole weight, and we move so it sticks. Until then you will be watched over in ways nobody will see, and you will eat, and you will know that the counting has started. Can you carry that? He could carry that. Carrying, he did not tell her, was the one thing he had trained for all his life. "Minute it," said Gornuck, and the frost, already ahead of him, had. Albus Dumbledore came to Gringotts at 7 minutes past 5 that afternoon, through the public doors in traveling robes the color of a reasonable evening, and was met on the frozen lake floor by a keeper of standing instructions who had been standing, it appeared, precisely where Dumbledore would come to halt, for some minutes before he arrived. "Chief Warlock," said Gornuck. "Keeper," said Dumbledore pleasantly. "I find I have questions touching an account." "The bank," said Gornuck, "has answers touching several, and is charter-bound to give none of them to any party lacking standing, and notes that the Chief Warlock's standing, in the matter the Chief Warlock has not yet named, is presently the subject of instruments in preparation." The marble hall went on glittering around them. Somewhere a scale settled, weighing something small to 4 decimal places. "Instruments," said Dumbledore. "One of which," said Gornuck, "being ready, the bank may as well serve economically, the party being on the premises, and he presented with both hands and archival correctness a single fold of parchment sealed in black wax, and in the wax, sharp as the day of its carving, a triangle, a circle, a line. Dumbledore did not take it at once. He looked at the seal for a measurable moment, and whatever moved behind his half-moon spectacles was banked too deep for any audit in the hall to reach. And when he did take it, he took it the way a man takes a telegram in wartime, with hands that have decided in advance to be steady, and broke the wax with a thumbnail there, standing on the frozen lake, which was not what men like him did with documents, and read it once. The parchment said what the vault's plate said: removed by right of blood. Released on loan 1981 for study, term 1 month, and beneath the bank's Fenswire recital in a script that had not been on the parchment when Gornock sealed it, frost-laid patient, 4 words and then 5. The month is long. The heir asks him for it. Albus Dumbledore stood in the glittering hall of Gringotts for a long moment, holding a piece of paper as though its weight wanted checking, and around him goblins went about the evening's business with the studied blindness of a species that misses nothing, and behind him, 4 decimal places away, the scale finished settling. "Keeper," he said at last, and his voice had stepped down into a register the hall's chandeliers did not warm, cold and precise and courteous to the bone. "The item in question is an artifact of very great danger in times that have not finished being dangerous. It has been kept safe." "The bank," said Gornock, "keeps a stand for it that keeps its shape, and minutes the chief warlock's word choice, kept safe. The compact's ledgers use a different verb for items away from their vault past term, and the bank is confident the chief warlock, a scholar, would find the goblin verb instructive. It does not translate cleanly. The nearest wizard rendering," and the black eyes came up, bright, correct, 7 centuries deep, "is owed." Dumbledore folded the parchment with 3 exact motions and put it into his robes, next to whatever men like him keep next to their hearts. "Good evening, Keeper," he said, and went out through the public doors into Diagon Alley, where the evening had come on cool for July. And he stood on the white steps of the bank a moment, one hand light on the balustrade, an old man in reasonable robes with a paper owing next to his heart. And the decision he arrived at there in the space of 9 steps of descent was arrived at as all his worst ones had been, gently, thoroughly, for excellent reasons, and alone. He would go to Little Winging and look at what the river had sent back. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The kind old man he came on a Sunday which showed research. Sundays Vernon golfed. Sundays Petunia took Dudley to her mother-in-law's for lunch and returned at 4. Sundays between 9 and 4, number 4 Privet Drive held 1 resident aged 6 with a list of chores calibrated to the minute. And on the second Sunday of July at 10 in the morning, while Harry was watering the hanging baskets, a man came up the path who had dressed for Little Winging out of what could only have been a book and not a recent book. A lavender summer suit, a waistcoat with a watch chain, a hat from a bandstand, and a beard silver fine as spun sugar tucked into his belt. Harry saw him over the fuchsias and knew him for 3 things at once in descending order of certainty: a wizard, the entry senior to everything, the face for the empty column, the someone Mrs. Figg's pad wrote to, and the owner of 4 initials and a periwinkle blue gaze that arrived like a hand on your shoulder ahead of the man himself, and stayed there while he smiled and said in a voice like a warm room, "Good morning, you must be Harry." APWBD, thought Harry, and turned off the hose. The vault had said ask him for it. Harry had turned the instruction over nightly, and had resolved in committee on a policy, not yet, not first. A thing asked too soon is a thing shown. Gornock's whole morning had taught him that the shape of your asking is the shape of your hand, and this man read hands. So he stood with the hose dripping and looked up through his fringe with the flat and curious dullness that 5 years in this house had made his best-worn coat, and said, "Aunt Petunia's out till 4. "I know," the old man said comfortably. "It is you I hope to find. My name is Albus Dumbledore. I was a friend of your parents." Now the sentence was a gift and a probe both. Harry could feel it working even as it landed, feel it being watched into him. And the terrible thing, the thing he took to the churchyard afterward, was how much of it got through on the merit of the words alone. A friend of your parents. 11 days ago that sentence would have bought its speaker anything in Harry's possession. It arrived now into a mind that held a mother's recorded sentence in a bank registry under no circumstances, and a stand that kept the shape of what belonged on it, and it still nearly worked, which taught Harry in one wash of cold the difference between knowing about a man and being proof against him. "That's nice," Harry said, dull, flat, the hose dripped. "May I sit?" said Dumbledore, indicating the garden bench with his hat already sitting. He arranged himself with the ease of a man for whom every bench in Britain had always made room, produced a paper bag and held it out. "Sherbet lemon, strangers with sweets want something and pretend not to." "No, thank you," Harry said. "I'm not allowed." "Ah." The blue gaze did its slow, kind circuit. The baskets, the hose, the mended sleeve, the 2 big shoes, and Harry stood inside it, feeling it inventory him and file him under something, and could not tell under what, and understood suddenly and with force that this was what other people felt around him now, and resolved to be more careful with it. "A well-kept garden," Dumbledore said. "Do you do much of it?" the watering and the weeding and the edges. Industrious, a pause gauged to a hair. "And are you happy here, Harry?" The question every audit in the world had circled and none had asked outright, asked kindly. Asked, Harry was nearly sure, in the expectation of the answer yes delivered in the voice children used when the person who could punish them was in earshot. Asked so that a box could be inked somewhere. Visited, asked, answered. The lie assembled itself obligingly on his tongue, 5 years smooth. He looked at the old man's hands instead, folded on the bandstand hat. Strong old hands, right one oddly weathered beside the left. Hands that had, per the ledger, held his father's cloak for 4 years and 8 months for study, term 1 month. The month is long. He put the lie down. "It's where I live," Harry said, the gaze stilled. Somewhere behind it a great many things happened quickly. Harry, watching the surface as he had watched Petunia's face over the pencil names, caught only the wake of them. A wince, instantly governed, and behind it, faint and far worse, relief at how well the answer had been governed in return. This man did not want to hear yes and know it false. He wanted to hear something true enough to live with. "It's where I live" had been, Harry realized, exactly calibrated to that want, and he hadn't calibrated it. It had come out of him at the level his voice went when the hush leaned in, and the hush was leaning now off his right shoulder, a held-open door, listening. And Albus Dumbledore's eyes moved for a quarter of a second to the space off Harry's right shoulder, to nothing, to air and June light and a fuchsia. To precisely the place where the door of the hush hung open, and something in the periwinkle blue tightened like a lens seeking a focus it could not find, and Harry stood very still in thought, with a lurch that had no fear in it and no name he'd spend. He can almost see it. Nobody living had ever glanced at the door, not Petunia at her most rigid, not Mrs. Figg with all her cats deposing to her. This lavender man in a bandstand hat had sat down on a bench and within 4 sentences had looked at the exact hinge of Harry's second life, the way you look at a word you used to know in a language you've let go. "Harry," said Dumbledore gently, still looking a quarter-inch wide of him, "has anything unusual happened to you lately?" "I got bitten by a dog," Harry said, and held up his left hand, pale seam and all, with a promptness he was proud of for a decade. It broke the focus. The blue gaze came back to the ordinary and inspected the healed bite, and the old man made a sound of grandfatherly sympathy and asked whether it had hurt, and Harry said yes, a lot, and for a minute the bench held exactly what a passerby would have seen, an old gentleman and a polite child discussing a dog. Underneath, on the margin's frequency, something else was happening. The probe came again, subtler, a pressure like the beginning of remembering something, warmth at the edge of thought, a sensation of the garden going optional, and it slid toward Harry's eyes on the rails of all that kindness, and the door off his shoulder swung without drama and without Harry's asking between. Harry felt it happen from inside, and it happened like the tumbler in the hill, enormous, quiet, total. The pressure did not break against it. It arrived where the door was and found that the garden at that address had stopped being the sort of place where anything arrived. There was no wall to strike, no lock to pick, only a margin that had closed its page to him, courteous as a library at 6 o'clock. And laid along the closing, plain as frost on a ledger, a signature that Harry could not read from where he stood but that the visitor evidently could, some sentence in spiral letters presented once withdrawn. Albus Dumbledore sat back on the bench. He looked for one unbanked second, all of 105 years old, and then the second closed and the warmth resumed and every pain of him was fitted back and pootied, and he said in the pleasant voice with no seam showing, "You are well cared for then, you have enough to eat, you sleep warm." "I sleep fine," said Harry, who slept in a bolted cupboard the visitor's own instruments were keyed to the wards of, and watched the answer be received, weighed against something and allowed, and learned thereby exactly how much the kind old man had decided not to know today, and entered the quantity in the ledger under its correct heading, which was not hatred and was not trust and did not have a name yet in his 6-year-old accounting. It would be years before he could label the entry precisely. "This is what it costs him to keep me here. Note that he pays it." Then Harry spent his one prepared coin. He had drafted the question at the churchyard wall, tested weights with Mrs. Kitely, who had vetoed 3 versions as too knowing, your child, ask like one, the artillery S and the innocence, and he delivered it now with the hose in his hand and his eyes on the fuchsias in the exact voice of a boy asking why the sky was blue. "You said you were their friend, my mum and dad." He turned and looked up, mild as milk, and put it through the old man's ribs on a Sunday morning between the bench and the baskets. "Then why does nobody ever say their names to me? You haven't either," I counted. Silence in the garden of number 4, 2 streets off, a lawnmower. The old man sat with his hands folded on his hat, and Harry watched the sentence go in and meet, not defenses, but a whole interior architecture of them already standing, floor on floor, a century of load-bearing reasons, sound ones, kind ones, greater goods stacked to the rafters, and watched it bypass every floor and land in the cellar where an old man kept a sister he had failed to say the name of for 80 years. He did not know that then. He knew only what he saw from outside, that the periwinkle gaze went for a moment to the middle distance over Harry's shoulder at nothing, at a garden in another century, in exactly, precisely to the quarter-inch, the manner of Petunia at the sink, and that when it came back older. James, said Albus Dumbledore quietly, and Lily. The names hung in the June air, said properly with the weight on them, one each. A wage paid in full, first payment in 5 years from the whole living world. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it, and was 6 about it, and let it show, because Mrs. Kitely was right about where the artillery was. And the old man looked at the child being nakedly 6 for one unguarded moment over 2 said names, and something in the deep interior of all those load-bearing floors moved a fraction on its footings, and would never afterward sit entirely plumb again. And Albus Dumbledore stood up rather quickly for a man of his years, and said that he had kept Harry from the watering long enough. At the gate he paused, hat on, and the last probe was made of plain words. Should anything ever frighten you, Harry, anything strange, anything you cannot explain, I hope you will tell your aunt, and I will hear of it and come. There are people who watch over you, more than you know. I know, said Harry, mild as milk, dull as dishwater, 6 as a birthday cake, and watered the fuchsias, and did not watch him leave, having learned the trick of it now, and felt the periwinkle attention rest one last quarter-second on the open door of the hush that hung where nothing was before the gate clicked, and the lavender suit went down Privet Drive like a wrong note walking, and the margin all down the street, in the roots of the hedges, under the identical lawns. Turned toward the wake of him and closed its pages one by one. He took the report to the yard that evening, hose duty done, house empty till 4, and delivered it complete in order, standing in front of the chest tomb. The lavender suit, the sherbet lemons, the question about happiness, the glance at the door of the hush, the pressure that had come in on the rails of the kindness, and the 2 names said properly at the end. Mrs. Kitely heard it through twice. She made him give the second telling backwards, which was her method with anything that mattered. Liars can only tell a story in one direction, child. Make sure you're not one by accident. And at the glance at the door she stopped him both times and made him place the visitor's eyes to the quarter-inch. He looked at the hinge, she said finally. Not at the room, at the hinge. The felt flower was motionless. I've had the vicar stand where you're standing and feel a draft and button his coat. I've had a bishop once at the confirmation look clean through hobs and compliment the drainage. The living don't see the hinge. The ones that see the hinge have stood at a door themselves some time or other and been refused, and it marks them. Refusal always marks worse than passage. She looked at him over the handbag. You said his beard was down his belt. An old man. Old men who have been refused at doors, child, divide 2 ways, and only 2. The ones who made their peace with the refusing, and the ones who have been standing in the porch ever since, out of the rain, telling themselves they chose the porch. A chestnut leaf came down between them, and she watched it land. Your lavender man pays wages, I'll allow. 2 names, said proper, that's coin, and you were right to bank it. But you mind which kind of old man he is before you let him hold anything else of yours, and expect traffic now. He'll have written to somebody before his supper, his sort always has a somebody, and yards here wing beats the living sleep through. This one heard 3 last night, going north, high in a hurry. Nothing goes north from here in July, child, except news. What do I do? Harry asked. Nothing, said Mrs. Kitely with relish. You water the fuchsias, and you learn your letters, and you let the grown folk and the goblins and the great storms wear themselves out over your head. You're the only one on the board who wins by growing, young Peverell. Every year you last costs them and pays you, now off home, and Harry. She had never yet used his first name. He stopped with his hand on the gate. You told the whole of it in order, forwards and backwards, and you left out only what you promised your hill to leave out, and I sat here and watched a 6-year-old do that, unschooled. The nutcracker face shut, which was, he had learned by now, how it looked when it was proudest. Somebody in that valley is getting a bargain, mind the gate. The headmaster's office received him back at dusk with its usual furniture of soft noises, the instruments, the portraits pretending sleep, the phoenix arranging one wing. Dumbledore stood at the window a long time without lighting the lamps. On the desk lay the afternoon's harvest, and it was this, nothing. A polite child in mended clothes who claimed a dog bite, offered no complaint an inspector could file, asked one question, and accepted 2 names as though they were the entire settlement of an estate. Set beside it the other columns, a silver instrument spinning with a countersignature in it. A bank gone from stone to flint, serving papers whose wax bore the sign he had chased across Europe in the ruined years, the sign he had traced on the flyleaf of a stolen book at 17 with a boy whose beauty had been a form of argument, the sign under which his sister lay in Godric's Hollow with his mother, in ground he had not stood on since the coffin went down. And now today the last column, the one he audited by lamplight lest dusk, because he did not care to see his own face while he did it. Something in a Surrey garden had shut a door in him and signed it. He had touched the boy's mind with the lightest instrument he possessed. Featherlight diagnostic. He had told himself diagnostic all the way down the A-road of his conscience, and the door had closed and the signature had presented itself, and he had read it because the crypt had wanted it read. That was the part with teeth. It had been laid out for him in the old tongue of the old script in the manner of a solicitor's card left on a silver tray, and it had said in full, "The child is in the keeping of his house." Enquiries to the door, inquiries to the door. He had spent 11 days establishing that there was no door. There was no Peverell seat in any register the ministry held. There never had been. The family had gone to daughters 7 centuries ago, and the daughters had gone to potters, and the crypt of the 3 brothers was a tale for annotating, a triangle drawn in the margins of a children's book. He had believed that at 17, when he and Gellert had ransacked Bathilda's library for it and found margins. Some part of him, disgraceful, ineradicable, 17 forever, had believed it the way you believe in a door out of a burning house, with longing, that the hallows had a hearth, that the hearth had a keeper, that the keeper might, if a seeker were worthy, open. It had opened for a 6-year-old with a watering can, and it had not asked whether he was worthy. It had asked whose blood he was and where the blood had been. Fawkes made a low sound on his perch, 2 notes, questioning. "No," Dumbledore said, to the phoenix, or to the portraits, or to the boy with the argument-shaped beauty who was not in the room and had not been for 80 years. "Not that, I am not, that is not the wound this time." He sat at the desk. He took out the loan notice and unfolded its 3 exact folds and read it again, the Fensoir and the frost. The month is long. The heir asks him for it. The cloak lay 2 floors down in a locked drawer in tissue, where it had lain for 4 years and 8 months while he studied it. And study was even the truth, or had been for the first month, the term of the loan. The month James had laughed and said, "Keep it as long as you like, Albus. It's rather restful being visible. You should try it." Then Godric's Hollow, and after Godric's Hollow the calculus had changed, because after Godric's Hollow the cloak was no longer an artifact on loan from a living friend. It was 1/3 of a set, and the boy who owned it was a marked child with a piece of a murderer lodged in his scar, and Tom would return, the instruments, the whispers out of Albania, the arithmetic of prophecy. Would return, and a child who could walk unseen from any watcher was a child who could not be kept, and a child who could not be kept could not be protected, and a child who could not be protected could not do the thing the prophecy said only he could do, and so the drawer and the tissue and the years, sound floors, load-bearing, every joist of it argued in good faith in the long nights of 1981 with the graves fresh. And below the cellar of all of it, where he did not take the lamp, the other tenant, that it was the cloak, the 3rd hallow, the one he had never held before and had wanted with a want that predated everything decent he had built on top of it, and that some nights in the first year he had lifted it out of the tissue not to study it. He put the notice away. He rose and stood before the shelf of instruments, and the little silver one spun its doubled figure, the bright strand and the dark, his ward work and the countersignature, braided now, inseparable. He had tried in June gently to read the dark strand's terms, and the instrument had stopped altogether for 6 hours, which he had understood correctly, as a bank understands a returned check. The blood ward stood. That was the queer mercy in the ledger, and he clung to it with both hands of his intellect. Whatever had signed itself into the boy had not unseated Lily's protection. It had underwritten it. The house on Privet Drive was, tonight, better warded than any structure in Britain, including the one he stood in, and none of the new strength was his, and none of it answered to him, and all of it regarded him. He had felt this in the garden in the closing of the page with a precision that had frightened him more than enmity would have as a counterparty. Not an enemy, a man with an account in arrears, so he took parchment. An old man's remedies, a letter, a committee, a term of art. He wrote to no one about the crypt, because there was no one the knowledge would not endanger or arm. He wrote instead, in his other capacity, under the Weisengamot seal, a memorandum for Monday's closed session, touching the recent activity in certain dormant accounts at Gringotts and the emergence of claims in the name of an extinct house, proposing, pending review of the guardianship of the minor concerned, that all such claims be held in abeyance. Citing for precedent the statute of dangerous inheritances drafted, he did not need the library to recall, because he had drafted it in 1946 in the spring after Nurmengard, to keep what Gellert had gathered from passing to Gellert's cousins. His quill moved evenly. The instrument would pass, he held the votes, it would buy a year, perhaps 2, and in the bought time he would do what he had always done, the only thing he had ever done since the summer everything burned, arrange matters so that the people he loved were safe and ignorant and within reach. He signed it and sanded it and sat still. On the shelf the dark strand kept its own time, a half-beat behind his, patient, unhurried, keeping books. "I am trying," he said to the empty office, cold and precise and to no living audience, "to keep him alive long enough to be anything at all, master of whatever he likes, alive first." Frost did not form on any ledger in the room held no ledgers of that kind. But 2 floors down in a locked drawer in tissue, something that had lain flat for 4 years and 8 months lay, from that night onward, very slightly less flat, in the manner of cloth that has begun in the dark, in the patience of woven things, to remember a shape it was cut to. "You had a visitor," said the warden. The dream chamber stood open to its ledgered stars. The river ran wide and easy tonight, and Harry sat on the stone lip with his knees drawn up, and the braided voice sat itself beside him in its fashion, a settling of the light. You saw, the house saw. The house has better manners than to watch you always, little heir, but it attends your thresholds. That is old law, thresholds are ours. The dry strand turned over something with care, choosing. He is a great man, your visitor. I use the word as a measure, not a medal, great as a storm is, or a debt. And he stood at our door once before, a long lifetime ago, at the age when men are made of wanting, and the door did not know him, and he has carried the not knowing ever since the way, the voice stopped itself. Harry had the sudden sense, never verified, of a committee within the braid, a strand overruled. He carries it, the voice resumed simply. Hear what your house requires of you concerning him, and it is neither trust nor war, it is exactness. You will owe him nothing invented and nothing forgiven in advance. When he does you good, enter it. When he does you wrong, enter it. He is owed the same book everyone is owed, kept the same way, and I tell you, child, because I kept books on men for 40 years alive and 700 dead. The great ones are ruined oftenest by the people who stop keeping their pages. They come to believe their account is a different kind of account. Nobody else is. That is the whole doctrine of the river, and kings have drowned learning it, and you have it free tonight at 6, sitting down. He said James and Lily properly, Harry said, one each with the weight on. Then enter that, said the warden first. The light shifted, the lesson turned businesslike, and what came next came quiet and unhurried and changed the architecture of the year. There is a second matter. The house had intended it for later, but the visitor has moved the season. He came within a hand's breadth of seeing what sleeps at your scar and what he would do upon seeing it. The house declines to model. So you will hear it from your own dead first tonight plainly in words for 6. Little heir, the mark on your forehead is not only a scar. Within it, where the curse broke against your mother's word, a splinter lodged, a shaving of the one who came that night. It is not a spirit and not a person. It is carrion with a memory. It is small and asleep, and it is not you. The river spoke slowly now, laying each stone dry before the next. It should have gone down to the water that night. It is overdue. It is written in our ledgers as the house's second accounting, restitution. What was stolen from the river must be returned to the river, and it will be from your keeping without your harm. That is a promise of the house, and this house has never once broken a promise, which is why it makes so few. Can you take it out now? Harry asked, small voice, level, his hand was at his fringe. No, and hear the reason entire. The thing is grown into where it lies, the way a nail rusts into a gatepost. Torn out by force, it takes wood with it. There are those in the loud world who would tear, some to have the nail and some to spite it. The house does not tear. The house waits for the season, and the season is this. You must stand at the threshold yourself, awake, consenting and old enough to consent, and the ford must be opened with the proper rites, and your dead must stand the banks. 2 years, perhaps 3, until then it sleeps, and it is watched. The stern strand came forward, iron under the dry. One law in the meantime, and it is absolute. You do not speak to it. You do not listen when it speaks. You do not feed it, and now I will tell you what Alma Kitely would not in the open air. It feeds on exactly one thing, and the thing is this, the river showed him. Not in words, in a single held image, mercilessly gentle. The churchyard wall at lamplighting. The yard's silver settling toward him parish-wide, warmth rising like water finding a level. And the splinter turning over, leaning at the warmth, all mouth. It does not feed on your gladness, said the warden while the image stood. Mark the grain of it, this is exactness, this is the family trade. It feeds on gladness hoarded, on warmth kept in, walled in, told to no one, spent on no one, the way a miser's gold feeds thieves. Warmth that moves cannot be eaten, it is too quick, it is a river, the splinter is carrion and eats only what lies still. So the counsel of your house is not be less glad, little one. It is the opposite, and it is medicine and marching order both. Be glad outward. When the warmth comes up in you, spend it the same hour. Tell the dead woman, tell the star-named steward, tell the man with the hat. Give it away as fast as it rises, always, everywhere, and the lodger in your scar will starve at a feast, for nothing on its side of the door has ever once understood giving, and nothing ever will. That is the whole of your defense, and no wizard alive could have prescribed it, and most would call it nothing. Your house calls it the first right, taught to every child of the line at 6, and you are late, and we begin tonight. What are you glad of? Say it aloud, spend it. And Harry Potter, sitting on the stone lip of the river at the bottom of everything, thought of 2 names said properly in a garden, and a honey cake, and a hand the size of a spade offered palm sideways with the terms visible, and an old woman on a chest tomb keeping the 20th century's manners at the 21st's door. And he began haltingly, 6 years old, to learn on purpose the thing his mother had done once, all at once, entire, at a bedroom door in Godric's Hollow. And far away in a locked drawer a cloak remembered a shape, and nearer in a sleeping scar, something small and overdue turned its blind mouth to a table where the dishes were being carried out and out and out, and found nothing lying still, and went hungry back to sleep. The leak, when it came the way leaks come, through the cheapest seam. Gringotts did not leak. The Deep Roads Service had kept a door secret through 3 goblin wars and would have eaten its own ledgers before whispering. But the bank stood in a world of wizards, and the world of wizards had plumbing, and on the 8th of July a junior owl office dispatcher at the ministry, whose duties included the logging of interinstitutional post and whose vices included a standing debt at a card table in a cellar off Nocturne Alley, logged a black-sealed envelope, Bank of Origin Gringotts, addressee redacted under treaty, and because redactions were his specialty and grievances his hobby, held the log slip up to a lamp. Treaty redaction was good ink, it beat the lamp. It did not beat the wax impression the envelope had left, faint as a breath, on the slip beneath it, a triangle, a circle, a line. He did not know the mark, he knew a man who paid for marks. The shop stood where Nocturne kinked, between a dealer in cursed mirrors and a premises that had been to let for 60 years because of what the floor did at new moon, and its sign said, in gilt gone tactful with age, S. Wren, Antiquities of the Late Owned. Fair prices given. Inside, among the cases, Silas Wren was at his morning's work, which this Tuesday was the dressing of a tray of mourning rings, jet and pale gold, each set with its plaited lock of hair under crystal, each tagged in his own square hand with provenance, date, and in a private shorthand column whether the hair's owner was still, in any sense that mattered to specialist clients, available. He was a neat man of no remarkable age, dressed like a verger, with reading glasses on a chain and the pink, scrubbed, dry-handed cleanliness of professions that wash often and to a standard. The trade called him the bonewright, out of his hearing. In his hearing the trade called him Mr. Wren, and paid promptly. He heard out his dispatcher over the rings without looking up, and when the log slip was produced he did look up and took the slip in his dry pink fingers and was silent for the duration of an entire customer entering, browsing, and thinking better of it. "You'll want paying," he said at last mildly, "and you'll be wanting it in the usual way, off the books." He paid. Then he locked the shop, turned the sign, went into the back room among the crates and the packing straw and the 17 discreet drawers of his life's real inventory, and stood before the wall where, framed in black, hung his one piece of pure scholarship, the fruit of 30 years of buying grave goods from men with shovels and no questions, a rubbing, charcoal on tissue, taken illegally in 1961 from a slab in a West Country valley whose location he had bought with a farm. A triangle. A circle, a line, and a spiral of letters no purchased scholar had ever read one word of, sealed until he had been told the script likely said by the best of the purchased scholars before the man's nosebleeds began. Everything of that period is sealed until, Mr. Wren. It's the until they took such trouble over. Silas Wren looked at his rubbing for a long, clean, dry-handed moment, and then at the log slip's ghost of wax, the same mark alive in traffic, franked 11 days ago and directed to a redaction in Surrey. The trade knew 2 facts about Surrey, and Mr. Wren, a specialist, knew a third. The ministry's undersecretaries wondered aloud at their card tables why Albus Dumbledore's owls went so often to a Muggle postal district with nothing in it, and the trade's genealogists who serviced the inheritance fraud market listed the district in their gazetteer of last known residences of persons of interest against one name only, Potter. "Until," said Mr. Wren to the rubbing in the tone of a man hearing a very old invoice come due in his favor, and took down from the 17th drawer a card and wrote upon it in his square neat hand, an offer of employment for 2 brothers of his acquaintance, the Doggets, Enoch and Bill, of Cooper's Fen. Careful men, patient men, men of the retrieval trade, who between them had brought Mr. Wren over the years, and always alive, always undamaged, because damage voided provenance, everything he had ever asked them for. He did not post the card at the ministry. He was not an amateur. He whistled once at the back door, and something that roosted over the Tillette premises came down for it on wings that had no business being that quiet. The Daily Prophet, Saturday, 12 July 1986, page 4, below report on Cauldron Bottom standardization. Rumblings beneath GRINGOTTS. Persistent reports from Diagon Alley suggest unusual activity in the lowest levels of Gringotts Bank, where sources claim doors sealed since before the founding of the ministry itself stood open on the night of 17 June. Bank spokesgoblins declined to comment in the traditional manner, see photograph. The Department of Mysteries, asked whether the so-called deep doors fall within its remit, replied that the department neither confirms nor denies the existence of doors. Senior sources within the Wisengamot urge calm, noting that dormant account activity is a routine matter of goblin bookkeeping. Nevertheless, this newspaper understands that at Monday's closed session, the alley itself had it richer than the paper dared. By Saturday afternoon, the story had been through every till on the street and come out wearing improvements. The deep doors had opened, and a cold wind had put out every torch below the 5th level. The deep doors had opened, and 40 goblins had knelt to an empty corridor. The deep doors had opened, and old Bodrig, who hadn't surfaced since the Grindelwald years, had been seen above ground in daylight buying, of all things on earth, apples. Fortescue's did a brisk trade in speculation with raspberry sauce. In Nocturne the tone ran different, quieter, drier, commercial. In 3 back rooms, men who dealt in the graves trade observed to one another that certain prices, for certain classes of goods, wanted reviewing because provenance was about to mean something new. And a letter on Department of Mysteries paper, hand-delivered to Gringotts by an unspeakable whose face nobody afterward could describe, was returned the same hour, unopened, with a single line of fence wire on the wrapper. The bank neither confirms nor denies the existence of departments. Lucius Malfoy read page 4 at breakfast twice, which was once more than he read anything at breakfast, and set the paper down by the marmalade with the crease exact. Routine, he said to the crease. Across the table, Narcissa did not look up from her own post. A black by training, she could assay her husband's voice to 4 decimal places, and this vintage of mildness meant only ever the scenting of an asset. The Peverell nonsense, she said. Half the alley had it by Thursday. Extinct houses do not bank, Lucius. Extinct houses do nothing at all, said Lucius Malfoy agreeably. He looked out the tall window down the avenue of hedges in the direction, though nothing marked it, of a closed session he held a hereditary seat in and had received that very week in Dumbledore's own even hand an agenda for, which is why the word to Price, my dear, is not extinct, it is dormant. He touched the bell for more coffee. The old man is moving to put a thing in abeyance. I find I am developing an interest in what he is so very anxious should keep. The injunction passed on Monday, in closed session, 31-11, with abstentions. Gornuck brought the news to Little Winging himself the following Saturday, to the safe room the bank had established for the weekly stewardship visits, which was the back parlor of a house on Magnolia Crescent that the bank had quietly bought through 4 intermediaries and staffed with one incurious caretaker, and he stood on a chair to put the parchment at Harry's eye height because the bank believed principals read their own instruments at 6 or at 60. Harry read it. It took him a while. The drafting was fine work and meant to be. In the matter of claims arising in the name of the House of Peverell extinct, all such claims held in abeyance, the purported instruments of inheritance sequestered from registration, the minor concern made subject of a guardianship review in camera, date to be fixed, and no party to move, transact, or publish in the name of the said house until the review conclude. They've stopped it, Harry said finally. Andromeda behind him stood with her arms folded, exact and white about the mouth. Ted had read it in 4 seconds flat over Harry's head, solicitor fashion, and gone very still in his chair. The vault and the steward papers and all of it, they can do that. They have voted, said Gornuck, that you do not exist yet. He took the parchment back, squared it, and his black eyes were bright and entirely calm, the calm of an institution 7 centuries into a compact whose counterparty did not sit in chambers. The bank observes 3 things, bearer, and then we will have tea, because your healer says you are to have tea at 4, whatever the Wisengamot is doing. First, the instrument is wizard law, and above ground the bank observes wizard law, and so above ground, for a season, the House of Peverell is a held breath. Second, the drafting has one author, and the author has, for the first time in the bank's long acquaintance with him, drafted in fear and drafted fast, and fast drafting leaves seams, and Ted Tonks and the bank's own counsel have found 2 already and expect a 3rd by Thursday. And third, Gornuck got down off the chair and looked up at the child the door had knelt for, and permitted himself at last in Harry's presence, the thing at the hinge of his jaw, fully, not a smile, nothing so mammalian, a showing of teeth with satisfaction behind it, 700 years of satisfaction, filed and ready. The ledger disagrees. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Snatchers and Stars. The Dursleys were informed of the new arrangements on the 3rd Saturday of July, by letter, on paper so heavy it changed the acoustics of the kitchen. Harry was weeding the border under the window at the time, which was not an accident. Ted Tonks had told him the delivery hour with the studied blandness of a man leaving a bicycle unlocked outside a sweet shop. The letter from the offices of TONKS and SOMERS, solicitors and commissioners for oaths, informed Mr. V. Dursley of Grunnings, in 4 paragraphs of flawless boredom, that a trust associated with the estate of the late Mr. and Mrs. J. Potter had appointed local trustees. That the trustees were empowered to satisfy themselves periodically as to the welfare of the minor beneficiary. That reasonable cooperation would attract a consideration toward the household's expenses in respect of the minor's keep, payable quarterly, and that unreasonable obstruction would attract instead correspondence of a different character. The kitchen went through its stations audibly, the snort, the silence, the second reading, the calculation. Harry, weeding, tracked the calculation by the creak of the 3rd chair. Money for the boy's keep was money. Vernon Dursley had spent 5 years telling Petunia the boy cost them a fortune, and here was the universe offering to concede the point quarterly. Against it, strangers, questions, that word welfare with its inspectorate smell, and the deep tectonic wrongness of anything arriving because of the boy that was not a bill. Greed won, as Ted had priced it winning, by a nose with conditions. The conditions landed on Harry within the hour, delivered at volume with the door shut. There would be no getting above himself. There would be no telling tales to jump-top solicitors. The money changed nothing. He was still what he was. "Yes, Uncle Vernon," Harry said, and went back out to the border and turned the phrase over while he worked, because it was true in a direction Vernon had not intended. The money changed nothing. The counting had already changed everything. The money was just the world learning to say so out loud. What the letter actually purchased revealed itself by degrees in the grain of the household week. His list of chores did not shorten, but the plate at supper stopped being an editorial. The cupboard stayed the cupboard, but the bolts, after the second trustee visit, were retired one Saturday by Vernon himself with a screwdriver and a running commentary about ungrateful natures. Petunia standing in the hall watching the screws come out with her arms crossed and her face shut, and Harry understood, filing the scene where he filed all data on his aunt, that somebody had told her the will existed. Not its contents, its existence. She had not looked at him since. And Saturdays now had a shape. At 9, Mrs. Figgs, ostensibly for the day, through Mrs. Figgs' back garden and the gap in her fence actually to the parlor on Magnolia Crescent where the week's real business waited. A healer named Feversham with cool hands and no small talk, who was rebuilding him bone by bone with potions that tasted of pond and worked like rumors of a better world. Ted with the file, Andromeda with the standards and lessons. Reading first and always at his own strand of the table, with the horn book propped where he could touch it when the letters swam. He was, the whole apparatus had discovered with something between delight and alarm, murderously quick at it. 6 years of nothing belonging to him had built a child who offered the entire kingdom of the written word, annexed it province by province with the cold thoroughness of a Roman. By the last week of July he could read the prophet's small print. By the second week of August he had been caught twice in the parlor's one locked bookcase, and Andromeda had changed the lock and then, after a visible internal audit, changed it back and rearranged the shelf so that the 3 books he must not read were behind the 40 he might as well. "He reads like his account depends on it," she reported to Gornuck on the Friday. "It does," said Gornuck unhelpfully, and minuted the pace. The reading changed the dreams. Now that letters would hold still for him, the warden set texts. A page a night, laid open on the air over the dark river, out of books whose originals stood in a vault under London, and the first was the little duodecimo with the walnut shell cover, on the courtesies owed to the dead, which turned out to be, behind its title, a book of manners in the exact sense Petunia would have recognized and been appalled by. Introductions, precedents, the paying of calls. "You will move through the world now as what you are," said the warden, "and the world is full of parishes. Every yard, every barrow, every drowned lane and burnt house keeps its own tenancy, and the tenancies are not yours, little heir. The mark makes you known to them, never owed by them. So the courtesies. He learned them the way other boys learned cigarette cards, that you halt at the edge of any ground that holds its dead and are still and let them look, for they have little to do and looking is company. That you name yourself first wholly and state your business, even if your business is only passing through, because the dead have been lied to more than anyone, being unable to follow anybody home. That you never count them out loud or in your head if you can help it, for counting is what their conquerors did. That warmth spent in their hearing is the best coin there is, and costs the spender nothing, and lights the parish for a night like a fair come to the fields. And that if ever you must ask, and the book's spiral script went formal here, and the warden's voice with it, you ask standing, aloud, with your name given first and no promise attached, and what comes of the asking is theirs to give and yours to thank, and it binds you to nothing and them to nothing, and this is the whole difference, cut in stone, between the courtesies and the filthy trade the fearful call necromancy. The necromancer compels and the heir requests, and the dead, who cannot be fooled about anything that matters, know the difference before the sentence ends. What if they say no? Harry asked. Then you bow, said the warden, and you walk on, and you think no worse of them, for they answered honestly, which is more than the living manage. But I will tell you a thing, little heir, out of 700 years of keeping this door. He could hear in the braid the dry strands settling back, satisfied as a grandfather at a gate. They almost never say no to a child. Children and the dead are natural allies. Both are told to be quiet, and both are counted instead of asked, and both remember everything. The 1st of August was a Friday, and Diagon Alley in the morning sun was the loudest thing Harry had ever loved on sight. The outing was official. School things could wait years yet, but the healer wanted him walked in the world, and the steward wanted him seen by nobody while learning to be seen, a contradiction Andromeda resolved with a glamour of exquisite subtlety, applied in the parlor with a wand of walnut and a muttered genealogy of charms. It did not change his face. Changed, she explained, the bill of sale. For the duration, passers-by would apprehend a Tonks grandchild, sandy like Ted, forgettable like Tuesday, and their eyes would pay him no more attention than the change in their pockets. The scar it hid entirely. Harry, shone himself in the parlor mirror with his forehead blank, stood looking for a long moment at the boy with nothing written on him, and Andromeda watched him look, and neither of them said anything, and the outing began. He rode the leaky cauldron's noise like weather, held Ted's sleeve through the wall that unbuilt itself brick by brick, and then stood in the alley's throat, while the whole bright bazaar of the wizarding world came at him at once. Cauldrons stacked like drunk cathedrals, owls conducting their grievances from shop-front perches, a window of brooms with a sign begging patrons not to press their noses to the glass, the smell of parchment and sulfur and frying, and over it all the crooked white tooth of Gringotts at the top of the street, his bank, holding up the sky at a subsidence angle. Nobody looked at him. 100 people saw him, and every single one filed him under Tuesday, and Harry walked the length of Diagon Alley engulfed in the crowd's supreme indifference and could have sung. At Florian Fortescue's he met the ice cream problem, which was that there were 31 flavors, and he had never in his life been asked to choose anything, and the machinery for wanting one thing over another out loud had simply never been installed. He stood at the glass with the count going in his head, 31, and the queue building behind him, and the old panic beginning its climb. Have a reason ready, want nothing is always safe, first right, said a voice at his ear, dry, amused, his own memory of the river doing him the service the warden had installed it for, spend it the same hour. He turned around and spent it. I can't pick, he said to Ted out loud, honest 6. I've never had any of them. You pick your favorite, and Mrs. Tonks picks her favorite, and I'll have the one that sounds maddest. The one that sounded maddest was a Fortescue original involving gooseberry, elderflower, and a charm that made it taste faintly of whichever summer you had liked best, and since Harry had only ever had one summer he liked, it tasted of 3 weeks ago, cut grass and honey cake, and the cold, clean smell of a river that ran under everything. He ate it slowly at a wobbling iron table in the sun, between a witch reading tea leaves into a paperback and a wizard arguing with his own hat, and Ted told him about the first time Andromeda had eaten a muggle ice lolly and bitten it, like an apple, out of pureblood ignorance of the licking protocols, and Andromeda confirmed the account with dignity, adding only that Ted had laughed so hard he had proposed. And the warmth came up in Harry like water finding a level, and he let it run straight out again, telling them about Mrs. Bright's stockpot poster, and the onion wearing its jumper, spending, and somewhere behind a blank forehead a splinter turned its blind mouth over and found the table already cleared. One shop window on that street did not file him under Tuesday. It stood narrow and dusty near the alley's south end, gold letters peeling over the door, a single wand on a faded purple cushion in the window, and Harry, passing it in the eddy of Ted's bulk, felt the establishment notice him the way the Fen would later that month. Not the man at first, the premises. The dust itself seemed to line. Then deep in the shop's brown dark, between shelf stacks that went up like cliffs, something pale moved and came forward, and was a face. An old face with wide, silvery, unblinking eyes, moons in the gloom, and the eyes came to the glass and found him through the glamour with no searching at all, the way Gornux had, and traveled, slow and certain, from his blank forehead down to his right hand. The old man did not open the door. He did not wave or stare rudely or mouth anything. He looked for the length of 2 of Harry's heartbeats, and then he inclined his head, deliberately, the depth of an inch, the bow of one tradesman to the arriving representative of a very old firm, and withdrew into the brown dark, and the dust settled back into its centuries with the whole event unrecorded anywhere except in 3 memories, one of which was the shop's. Ollivanders, said Ted, following his glance back, cheerful, having seen nothing. Wandmaker. You'll go in the year you're 11 and not before, and count your fingers after. He's a genius, and he unsettles everybody. What sort of firm remembers every wand it's ever sold, I ask you? The keeping sort, Harry thought, and made the entry and said nothing, and got, that afternoon, his first inkling that the list of who could see the mark was not a list of species, goblins yes, wizards no. It was a list of a different kind entirely, and the sorting principle on it was something like, those who kept accounts they had never once expected to see settled. That was the day, too, that he met the 3rd Tonks. She came banging out of Madame Malkin's opposite with a parcel under her arm. 13 years old and at war with her own center of gravity, hair a shade of bubblegum that had no genealogy of charms behind it whatever, and she crossed the alley by the shortest path regardless of traffic, was sworn at by a warlock whose foot she found, arrived at their table saying sorry to the alley in general, and sat down in the 4th chair with the totality of a dropped bag of shopping. Dora, said Andromeda in the voice of a woman selecting from a very long shelf the mildest of the available remarks. The step moved, said Dora, with the serenity of long practice. She looked at Harry with open, cheerful, total curiosity, and Harry looked back at her hair, and she clocked the look and grinned like her father and screwed up her face, and her nose became, in unhurried sequence, a duck's bill, a small trumpet, and a perfectly ordinary nose that happened now to be covered in freckles arranged in the constellation Orion, this last a private commission from her own boredom during history of magic. Metamorph magus, she said, matter of fact, wiggling the trumpet encore. Means I can look like anybody. Mostly I look like somebody who's about to knock your drink over, Hooray you then, Mum,'s been Saturdaying all summer and won't say a word, which means you're either a scandal or a client, and Dad's never once brought a client an ice cream. 3 adults arranged themselves to answer and were too slow, and Harry, who had spent a month learning exactness from a goblin, a ghost, and a hill, got there first with the 2 words in his ledger that were true at every level of secrecy at once, and offered his ink-stained hand across the table. "I'm Harry," he said. "Family, I think it's being reviewed." Nymphadora Tonks shook his hand, and her hair went, for reasons she could not afterward explain to her mother, the exact green of held breath, and "Family, I think it's being reviewed" entered the Tonks household lexicon that afternoon and never left it. The Doggets took him on the last Tuesday of August at 6:10 in the evening from Wisteria Walk, and the professional truth of the matter, entered afterward in 3 separate institutional records, was that it was a clean piece of work. They had watched the pattern for 5 weeks, which was the trade done properly. The boy walked from the school's summer play scheme to Wisteria Walk at 6, alone, because the aunt had stopped walking him in June. The old woman at the corner house watched him pass her window and waved. The boy waved back and turned in at Privet Drive 2 streets on. Enoch Doggett, who did the thinking, had identified the corner as the seam. A hedge, a lamp-post not yet lit, 70 feet neither watched nor overlooked once the old woman was handled. The old woman was handled with a ministry-plausible envelope, delivered at 5 to 6 by Bill Doggett in a postman's coat, containing a form about her cats and a low-grade confundus in the gum of the flap, enough to hold her at her kitchen table rereading question 4 for 20 minutes. No curses on the street. No marks on the child. Mr. Wren's terms were, as always, undamaged, damage voided provenance. Harry came down Wisteria Walk into the gap where the wave should have been, registered its absence with half a stride's hesitation, and the hesitation was the last free movement of the evening. The hedge stepped forward and became a big man in a postman's coat. A hand in a dragonhide glove closed his mouth from behind. Something pressed the back of his neck with the specific meaningless authority of a wand, and a voice, mild, unhurried, Fenland flat, said in his ear, "No biting, no kicking, no noise. Nobody's cross with you, boy. It's just business," and the world went porky sideways. It reassembled as a room that smelled of peat and lamp oil. Black beams, 1 lamp, shuttered windows, a table with a shallow box on it lined in gray cloth, and marsh sound outside the walls, an enormous nothing of reeds and water in every direction, which was itself information. Enoch Doggett put him in a chair, not roughly, tied nothing, locked the 1 door and stationed himself against it with his arms folded, while Bill lit a 2nd lamp and the 2 of them settled into the specific patience of men paid by the day. "Sit quiet," Enoch advised, "and you'll be home by the weekend, whatever weekend it is by then. Gentlemen's coming to look at you, that's all this is, a looking." Harry sat quiet. Outwardly a mouse of a child, folded up in a chair, eyes down, the picture of every cupboard year. Inwardly the committee met in emergency session, and the emergency was this. The tollstone was at home in the sock under the cot, because Saturdays it traveled and Tuesdays it did not, and the once between each visit home the warden had promised him sat in a drawer in Little Winging, 100 miles of impossible away. Every version of tonight he had ever rehearsed had the stone in it. He was 6, alone, coatless in the fen, and the 1 door was a man the size of the door, and nobody living knew where he was. Nobody living. The thought arrived with its own stillness attached. He let his eyes rest just past the shutters, at the margin, and the margin of Cooper's fen came into focus around him the way a dark room does, and it was not empty. Fen country was drowned country. It had been taking people since before the Romans came to drain it, and taking them steadily ever since. And out under the reeds all around, patient in the peat that had kept even their faces, the fen's long tenancy lay in its beds and had already, every one of them, turned toward the lit window of him, the way the cats had, the way the yard had, not summoned, noticing. 90 generations of the drowned and the lost and the Wachtoughton never came back, and the nearest of them lay under the very house, a girl bogged down 1100 years ago with an amber bead still at her throat, and she was listening to him the way you listen at the top of the stairs. "Never promise the dead anything," said Mrs. Kitely in the standing library of his head. "Names are payment," and the warden deeper, "It is not command, little heir. Nothing here is command. The dead answer the one the river will deal with, and they answer for their own reasons, and the reasons are theirs." So Harry Potter, folded in a chair in a fen house with his eyes down, did not command anything. He did the only thing he had ever been taught to do, the thing the whole strange curriculum of his summer had been, he saw suddenly, 1 long rehearsal for. Quietly under his breath, in the hush behind the wall of the world, he introduced himself. "I'm Harry," he said, into the margin. "I'm the one from the hill with the door. I'm 6. They took me from my street and I don't know where this is, and the people coming want the mark I carry and I can't reach my stone." He paused. The amber-bead girl listened at the top of her stairs. All the fen listened behind her. "I'm not going to promise you anything," he said, "because I was taught right. I'm just saying it out loud. My name's Harry Potter, and if any of you were ever small and far from home, that's what I am tonight." For a long moment nothing. The lamp fluttered. Bill Doggett turned a page of a week-old prophet. Then the fen answered, and it did not answer like a spell. It answered like a parish. The cold came first, rising through the floorboards with the smell of peat water, a larder cold, a kept cold, and the lamps burned on silently, but their light stopped traveling quite as far, and in the shrunken light the margin stood up through the house like water through a floor. The amber-bead girl came up the inside of the walls the way damp climbs, and stood in the corner shadows at the height of a girl, and she was not terrible. She was drowned and 1100 years old and interested, and after her came others, up out of their peat beds, drawn to the one lit window in 900 years of dark. A rush cutter still carrying the pattern of his ropes, 2 Roman soldiers who had gone into the wrong mere in the wrong fog and quarreled about it ever since, an abbess of the fens, one drowned abbey with her office still in her hands, a poacher, a witch-finder's mistake, a horse. They did not rattle chains and they did not moan. The dead of England stood around the walls of the Doggett's safe house in the courteous silence of a congregation waiting for the vestry door, and every lamp shadow in the room slowly acquired a tenant, and the temperature of the business changed. Bill Doggett looked up from his paper. Enoch came off the door an inch. They were professionals. They had swept the house at dusk with instruments that cost money, and the instruments had reported correctly no magic. What was standing up through the floor was not magic in any register their instruments had been sold to read. It was older accounting. Bill said Enoch, in a voice with the fenland gone thin in it, and then the shutters, all 4 sets, latched on the inside, opened without hurry at once. There was no wind. There were the reeds, silver under a half-moon, and standing in the reeds to the whole horizon, the parish. What happened next happened in the order the ledgers say, because 3 institutions took statements. The Doggetts, brave men in the only sense the trade required, held their post for the length of time it took the abbess to come through the east wall with her office open, reading the vigil for the unquiet dead in a Latin that predated the wall, at which point Enoch Doggett, who had once retrieved a locket from a tomb that whispered and priced the memory in every job since, made the professional judgment of his life, unlocked the one door and left with his brother into the fen at speed. The fen received them. It did not harm them. The parish had not been asked to harm anyone, and had its own opinion of what was owed a child. It merely declined for some hours to let their paths run anywhere but in wide, wet, weeping circles, until dawn grayed and the Doggetts sat down in the reeds like men at the end of an argument, and were found at 7 by 4 oars and a dog, soaked to the ribs, hands over their ears, extravagantly willing to confess. And the amber-bead girl came out of her corner, crossed the lamplight, which had never once shone through her in 1100 years and did not begin now, and stopped in front of the chair where the 6-year-old sat with his eyes no longer anywhere near down, and held out, cupped in her drowned hands at the height of his heart, a river-worn stone. Not his stone. His stone was in a sock in Surrey. This one was darker, older, fen-kept, and it purred the same purr, cold, patient cat with no cat. A tollstone of the line, carried into the marsh around some Peverell throat or in some Peverell pocket 900 years gone, and held in the peat since in trust by the parish for the day the account reopened. The house does not tear, said the hush, all around him, in no voice at all, in the fen's own grammar. The house keeps. Go home, little heir. Thank you, said Harry Potter out loud to the congregation, to the girl, to the reeds in the half-moon in the 900 years, and then, because wages were wages and he had been taught right, he stood up in the lamplight and paid. I don't know all your names, I'm going to learn them, not a promise, a plan. The abbess looked up from her office. Somewhere at the back the horse stamped, silver, soundless. My name's Harry Potter, and you were all small and far from home once, and somebody should have come for every single one of you. The stone went cold to purring in his hand. The fen opened its river road, down through the peat where the water remembered everything, and the last thing he saw of the safe house was the amber bead at the girl's throat catching the lamplight, gold and all that gray, like a name said properly after 1100 years. The ministry had it by morning as an attempted abduction, Muggle district, minor of interest, perpetrators in custody, babbling. The bank had it by midnight because the parlor on Magnolia Crescent had wards on its ward book keyed to the bearer's skin, and when Harry came up the river road into the back parlor at 9:30, soaked to the knees and gripping a stone that was not on inventory, the caretakers in curiosity turned out to have a floor to it after all. Andromeda Tonks arrived by 11, was handed the facts, and went so exact that Ted quietly moved the good teapot out of range. She took Harry's statement herself, in the manner the bank preferred, numbered items, no adjectives, and Harry gave it that way, which was its own small horror to watch, a 6-year-old deposing like a keeper. And at item 9 the Marsh answered. She set down her quill, and at item 14 she gave me the stone from the peat. She stood up, walked to the window, stood with her back to the room for the length of one long breath, and came back seated and exact with nothing about her changed except everything. The failure is mine, she said, to the record, quill moving again. The pattern was mine to see. A child who walks the same route at the same hour is a standing invitation, and I priced the risk at ministry snatchers and nocturne opportunists, and I did not price it at patience and payroll. That ends tonight. Item, the walking route dies. Item, the play scheme dies. Item, the fig arrangement is renegotiated with the bank in the room. Item, and here the quill pressed through, the guardianship review is no longer a thing we await, it is a thing we force. They'll say it proves his blood wards failed, Ted said from the door gently, playing the other counsel because somebody had to, or that it proves they're all he has. Albus, said Andromeda Tonks, warded a house, and the child was taken from a public street 400 yards from it, by two muggle-baiting professionals with a postman's coat and a gum-flap confundus, and was returned to safety by, she consulted the record with terrible courtesy, the drowned of Cooper's Fen, item 9. And if the chief warlock wishes to argue in front of Madame Bones that this state of affairs recommends the status quo, I will pay for the pensive myself. Amelia Bones took the case the next morning. A snatching of a minor was DMLE business, whoever the minor was, and the file that arrived on her desk had been assembled overnight by a solicitor who documented like a landslide in a bank that had decided, in its own phrase, to be seen to be what the compact said it was. Doggett's questioned separately agreed on everything which never happened, and what they agreed on could not be entered into evidence as written, so Bones entered it as spoken in camera and sat afterward for a while looking at the transcript. At the phrase the abbess came through the wall reading the vigil, and then at the client column where her clerk, following the money through 4 intermediaries with a Doggett's testimony as thread, had written in pencil pending confirmation, S. Wren, Nocturne, Antiquities. Wren's shop was found shut on Thursday, sign turned, gilt tactful as ever, and behind the counter on the floor among the morning rings, the Trade's Whisper Network reported with relish and the Aura report confirmed without any. The 17 discreet drawers of the back room standing open and empty, every gravegood gone, and across the framed rubbing on the wall, over the triangle and the circle and the line, in frost that had formed on the inside of the glass in August and never melted since, 4 words in a spiral script that no purchased scholar would ever again be paid enough to read. Sold, debt attaches, run. Mr. Wren had evidently read them fine. The warrant went out Friday. The Trade, which forgot nothing and forgave less, noted that the Bonewright's credit had died overnight in 3 currencies, goblin paper first, and drew its own conclusions about the wisdom in the present market of dealing in the goods of the late owned without the most scrupulous attention to which houses were late and which had merely been keeping quiet. Will they catch him? Harry asked Gornuck at the Saturday accounting. The Aurors, said Gornuck, will pursue him with the diligence of a department whose budget was cut in April. The bank pursues nothing. The bank has called his debts, published his paper, and notified the treaty ports, and observes that a man in the Graves trade who can no longer bank is a man whose colleagues now know 2 things, that he is carrying his whole inventory on his person and that no one is counting it. The bank and the black eyes were serene, finds pursuit redundant. Mrs. Figg took the whole business worse than anyone, which Harry had not expected and should have. He was walked to her house on the Thursday, escorted now always, and found her at the kitchen table where the confounded form about her cat still lay, and she had the look of a sentry after the sapper been through, grey, upright, holding the post out of pure spite at herself. Question 4, he saw, had been answered 11 times in the margins, in handwriting that got worse going down the page. 20 minutes, she said before he was through the door. 20 minutes I sat here like a hen reading that while they walked you off my corner. I'm to watch, that's all I'm for, and I know it's all I'm for, and I sat here reading about vaccination requirements. You waved at me every day all summer, Harry said. It stopped her. He climbed onto the chair opposite, which put the ruined form between them, and did the thing the summer had taught him, spending it plainly, looking at her the level way. Nobody else on the whole walk ever waved. I used to count on it. Corner house wave, 2 streets home. It was the best bit of the walk, and they knew it was the seam because it was the only bit anybody would notice going missing. He turned the form around, read question 4, turned it back. They needed magic to beat you, Mrs. Figg. They walked straight through everything else. You were the only thing on Wisteria Walk they had to pay for. The old woman looked at him for a long moment, hair coming out of its net, and then she got up abruptly and put the kettle on and stood with her back to him while it climbed to its boil, and Mr. Tibbles came up onto the table against all house law and sat on the form. You're kinder than the whole boiling of them, she said finally to the kettle. I'll tell you what I am, since everyone minds their manners and nobody says, I'm a squib, dear. Magic all through the family and none in me, like being born to a bakery with no sense of smell. They post the likes of me where nothing's meant to happen. The kettle sang. She warmed the pot with the ritual violence of the deeply rattled. Well, something happened, and my cat stood on that fence for 3 hours pointing at the corner like a lot of feathered fools with nobody to read them. She set down the tea, and her chin had the same set Dora's bat had. There's talk of renegotiating my arrangement with the bank in the room, if you please. Good, I have things to say about how this street is run, and I have waited 5 years for a room worth saying them in. Dumbledore came to the Tonks' house on the Sunday, and the argument happened in the kitchen, which was Andromeda's choice of ground, and everybody knew it. her kitchen, her wards, her teapot, her table that had hidden hunted families under its roof, while the petitioner's great war was being lost everywhere else. Harry was upstairs, asleep officially. The house had one guest room, and the guest room had become, without any instrument being drafted, Harry's room on the nights the new security protocols preferred him gone from Privet Drive, and the frequency with which the protocols preferred it was climbing week on week, and nobody was drafting that either. He had gone up at 8. Dora had gone up at 9 on her own initiative and stationed herself on the landing with a beanbag, a bag of crisps, and her father's old beater's bat across her knees, and when her mother came up at 10 to check the wards she looked at the picket line and looked at the bat and said only, "Grip lower, and don't wake him with the crisps." In the kitchen, cold and precise, the old argument went its rounds. He is safest anonymous behind his mother's wards in a world that has forgotten him. Every step into the open is a step toward the people who wait for him. You have seen this week what waits. And across the table, exact, unhurried, he was taken from under your anonymity in 5 weeks by a shopkeeper, Albus. The wards you cite guard one address he does not love against one enemy who is not here, and they guarded nothing on Wisteria Walk, and the world has not forgotten him. It has been forbidden to remember him, which is a different instrument with a different draftsman. He tried once the deep appeal, the one that had ended every argument of the decade. There are things about that child's situation, Andromeda, that I cannot tell you, and they are the very things on which all of this turns. And she poured his tea and answered in the voice her whole ruined family used for trumping. There were things my sister used to say she couldn't tell me too, Albus, on which everything turned. I have made a study of the sentence. In my experience it is true precisely as often as it is checked, which is why we are going to a courtroom, where checking is the furniture. He tried the war next, the one that was coming back, the arithmetic of whispers out of Albania, and got further, because she had buried too many to price that at nothing. And then she asked him, evenly, whether the child was better fitted for that war ignorant in a cupboard or taught in a kitchen, and he found the question had been set on the table facing him, like a mirror, and declined to look into it. Round and round, two formidable people, both right about the other's blindness, neither ceding the center, and it might have gone the usual way of arguments between the immovable, to a draw and a colder parting, but for the intervention at 10:30 of the only party in the house withstanding to end it. The kitchen door opened. Harry stood in the doorway in pajamas that fit him, which after 6 years still startled him nightly, with the fens toll stone in his fist, and behind him in the hall Dora hovered with the bat, having lost on the stairs the argument about whether this was her post or his. "You're talking about where I'm safest," Harry said, not accusing, confirming the agenda like a chairman arrived late. He came in, climbed onto the chair between them uninvited, and put the fen stone on Andromeda's kitchen table, where it lay being older than the house, and looked up at the greatest wizard of the age with the level, spendthrift, unhoarded frankness that was, though only a hill and a ghost and a goblin knew the doctrine of it, his entire defense against the dark arts. "Nobody living came for me on Tuesday," he said. "I want to say it in front of you because you count things I've seen you count. The wards didn't come, the ministry didn't come, you didn't come, and you watch me, I've known since the cats. Nobody living came." He turned the stone once, a half-rotation, precise, Exhibit A. "The ones who came were dead, and they came because my family kept their accounts for 700 years, and being kept matters more than being hidden. I'm 6, and I know that now, and I learned it in a locked room in a marsh, so." He looked from one adult to the other and produced, with the terrible fairness of children, the only compromise on offer in the case. "You can keep warding the house where I'm hidden, but I'm going to keep belonging to the people where I'm kept. Mrs. Tonks says the court will decide it properly with everyone looking. You like things decided quietly, I've noticed, but quietly is how I got put in a cupboard. Silence in the warm kitchen. The teapot out of range ticked as it cooled." Albus Dumbledore looked at the child between them, at the stone on the table that his scholarship dated against his will 3 reigns before the conquest, at the whole shape of the thing he had spent 5 years building and 1 summer watching be resurveyed by an older firm. And what he felt precisely in the cellar under the load-bearing floors, he entered in no record, then or ever. But he stood at length and took his hat, and at the kitchen door he turned, and the periwinkle eyes went once more to the space off the child's right shoulder, to the hinge of the hush, the door he had been refused at 70 years ago and had told himself ever since he'd chosen the porch. "The review will be heard in October," he said, cold, precise, and quiet. "I will not oppose the venue." A pause. "Good night, Harry. Mind how you keep him, Andromeda." "I have buried a great many people who were well loved and badly counted." "So have I," said Andromeda Tonks evenly, "and I was related to most of them." "Good night, Albus." When the door had closed and the wards had resettled, Harry sat for a while at the table, one hand on the fenstone, listening to the house around him. Ted bolting up, Dora arguing the bat up the stairs, water in pipes, a settling joist, the whole warm machinery of a kept place. Then he spent it same hour as taught out loud to the room and the steward both. "I'm glad of this kitchen," he said. "Enter it." Entered, said Andromeda Tonks, and if her voice moved on the word, the record, which she was no longer writing, does not show it. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The toll of the stones woke him at 4 in the morning on the 1st of October, both of them at once. The Surrey stone in the sock under his pillow and the fen stone in the drawstring bag Andromeda had sewn him, cold gone active, purring against each other through the cloth like two halves of one struck bell, and Harry sat up in the guest room that was becoming his room and knew, before the dream even came to fetch him, that the house under the hill wanted its heir. The dream, when he slept again, wasted nothing. The season has moved, said the warden. The chamber stood formal tonight, every groove lit, the ledgered stars low, the river running quick and dark under its hush. Hear the accounting of why entire, for you are owed the reasoning and not only the result. When the house set your second accounting at 2 years hence, perhaps 3, it weighed a sleeping splinter against a growing child, and the scale said, wait, the scale has been reweighed. Item, the splinter has been starved all summer by your own practice, and starving things sleep lighter, not heavier. That was always the price of the medicine. Item, what the splinter was shaved from has begun to move far away in a cold country, hunting the rumor of what your summer has cost it. The house hears it through the water, a scratching at the far doors, and each league it draws nearer, the shaving in your scar turns toward it, a needle finding north. Item, a great one nearly saw it in a garden in July, and what the great and frightened do with such seeings, the house declines to model twice. The dry strand came forward, and it had iron in it tonight, and the last item little air which outweighs the rest together. The house said you must be old enough to consent. The house has watched you since June. You stood in a locked fen house with nothing in your pocket and kept the law and asked without promising and paid wages after, and the house is done pretending you are younger than your ledger. The threshold will take your consent at Halloween. The question is only whether you give it. Halloween, Harry said. The date sat oddly. He turned it and it showed its underside, and he went still. That's the night they died. 5 years to the night, said the warden. The house does not choose the date for cruelty, child. It chooses it because thresholds have tides, and that night of all the year's nights, the veil at your family's ford runs thinnest and kindest both, worn soft by all the world's remembering. Every candle in every window is a hand on the door. And because there is an old arithmetic in it that the house will not hide from you, what was stolen on that night from your keeping at the breaking of your mother's word. There is a rightness in returning it on the anniversary of the theft, dated and witnessed, the way a good clerk reverses a false entry. Same column, same ink, 5 years late and accurate at last. Harry sat on the stone lip with his knees drawn up. The river went by, patient, immense. Will it hurt? Yes, said the warden, without one grain of cushioning, and Harry loved it for that his whole life, not as wounds hurt. As lancing hurts, worse going than staying for a moment, and then the ache of a thing that was always wrong made suddenly right, which is its own strange pain and passes. The house will not lie to you about the middle of the ford. You will walk it awake and alone, because consent walked by proxy is not consent, and there will be a moment at the middle when you are more alone than you have ever been, and the house may not spare you it, and would not if it could, because that moment is the right. A pause, the braid turned, something very old chose its words with both hands, and then you will not be alone. In a manner the house will let the night itself show you, for it is not the house's to promise. The banks, Harry said. His voice had gone level in the way that meant everything under it was moving. You said when it was time, my dead would stand the banks. That is the requirement, said the warden, and that is the last matter, and then you will wake and drink the cocoa. The metamorphed child will make you too sweet, and live October as a boy, for the house believes in boyhood the way bankers believe in collateral. The first accounting must be paid in full before the second opens. Remembrance before restitution. The banks must be stood before the ford is walked. That is the order cut in the seal stone, and no heir in 700 years has walked it otherwise. You have been gathering names since June, little heir. At Halloween at the door you will stand and say them, everyone you have, aloud in your own voice, and what you have kept will keep you. The chamber began to dim, courteous, unhurried, and the last thing the voice said followed him up through the layers of sleep like a lamp carried behind. Bring your list, Harry. It is the only invitation the dead require, and you have been writing it all summer without being told. He told the kitchen at breakfast, plainly in order, and watched the news go around the table like weather crossing a county. Ted put down his fork and did not pick it up again. Dora, who had been negotiating a third slice of toast, went quiet in the sudden totalizing way of teenagers who have understood more than the adults wanted. Her hair, which she had worn all September in a homework brown, drained to a gray Harry had never seen on her and would not see again for years. And Andromeda Tonks sat very straight with her tea untouched and took the deposition, numbered items, no adjectives, and only when the last item was down did she permit herself the single question that was not stewardship. Does it have to be him alone? Consent walked by proxy isn't consent, Harry said, in the warden's own cadence, and watched her receive the sentence and recognize its quality and hate it. What followed filled the month, and was, in the manner of all preparations for the unpreparable, mostly love wearing the costume of logistics. Gornuck was summoned and came within the hour. The bank, apprised, invoked the second of the four old duties, custody, and stood watch as nobody saw around 3 properties and 1 school. Feversham the healer was told exactly as much as the warden licensed and prescribed, with a straight face, a regimen for the right's eve of early bed, no potions whatever, and 1 good day. Whatever the child calls a good day. That is the entire pharmacology of thresholds, arrive having lived. And the list grew its final pages. He worked at the parlor table and the kitchen table both in pencil, and a copybook Andromeda had bought him with a green cover, and the copybook filled name by name in handwriting that improved down each page like a road climbing out of fog. The family first, the spine of it, Lily and James, Fleamont and Euphemia, Henry, Doria, Iolanthe and back, 12 generations of the line the horn book and the ledgers had taught him. Then the vestry list from St. Aldhelm S., the parish graves, nobody bought them stones, 41 names Mrs. Kitely had spelled out for him across 4 Wednesdays, testing him like a catechism. Then the roll of remembrance, 1939 to 1945, copied whole, with ARKITLY 4 lines down, entered in his best letters over her explicit, delighted protest. "I'm not your dead child, I'm my own, you're on my banks," said Harry, and wrote her in, and she sat on her tomb with her handbag and let him. And then the hard pages, the ones the adults found him at with the pencil stopped, the fen. He had said not a promise, a plan, and October was the plan's deadline, and the parish of Cooper's Fen had no vestry book. It took the bank. Gornuck, presented with the problem, observed that the bank did not deal in souls but did deal in records, and records of the drowned country ran through manor rolls, abbey rentals, coroners' inquests going back to the 12th century, and assize records, all of which institutions had banked. And for 3 Saturdays a goblin clerk with a fondness for lost causes sat with a 6-year-old and translated Latin death entries into names a child could carry. Aldith drowned fetching rushes, the amber season of 887 unrecorded, but the bead argued for. Osric, Wulfmere, Sister Ethelfled of the Abbey, her office in her hands. The rush cutter had no name in any roll, and Harry entered him anyway in pencil as the rush cutter who kept his ropes, because the warden's law said what is named is kept, and said nothing about the name being the one your mother gave you. Mrs. Kitely drilled the delivery, because delivery, she informed him across 3 Wednesdays, was the difference between a rite and a recitation. You'll be tired by the 100th, and by the 200th you'll be wanting your tea, and that's where the harm hides. Say them like setting down cups, child, not like dropping them. Every cup its own 2 hands, all the way to the table. She made him practice on the vestry list in the yard in the dusk, and stopped him each time the pace crept or the weight slid off the ends of names, and the yard itself was her instrument panel. A name set down properly went out into the stones like the gold going into the windows, and a name dropped raised nothing, and Harry learned to feel the difference in his own mouth before she flagged it, which was the point. There, Wilfred Dan, done proper, see old Dan's stone take it. A grass-grown lump by the wall, faintly, briefly, less alone. That man was a misery alive, and he's a misery dead, and he heard his name said with the weight on for the first time since 1931, and being a misery he'll complain about it, and being dead he'll hold it 40 more years like a coal in winter. That's the trade, child, cheapest good in creation, and the living hoard it like it costs. There remained one name he did not know how to gather, and one house he had to try. He went to Privet Drive on the last Wednesday of October, escorted to the corner, officially to collect the winter clothes that were his excuse, and actually because the copybook had a blank he could not leave blank. He found Petunia at the sink, where the important things always happened in that house, peeling potatoes for a supper he would not be at, and he stood at the end of the counter and asked it plainly, because plainness was the only tool that had ever once worked on her. "I'm learning about my family, the dead ones." He watched her shoulders acquire their armor and went on anyway, level. "I know Lily, I know the dates, what I don't have is anything she liked." You can't keep somebody with just their name and their dates. That's what a gravestone does, and gravestones are the worst at it. Everyone says so. A breath. "You're the only person left who knew her when she was 6, like I'm 6. The peeler stopped. The silence went on so long that the potato water settled glass still, and Harry had turned to go, blank conceited, when his aunt said to the window in a voice with all the varnish off it, "She used to make the teacups float, when we dried up. She'd get them going round the kitchen like a mobile, and mother would laugh, and I was the one had to catch them when she got giggling and lost hold." The peeler resumed, savage. "Willow pattern, blue. She liked the blue ones and conkers and pear drops and being first at everything, and she bit her nails right down to nothing every September, even when she was—" The peeler stopped again. "Take the clothes, they're on the stairs." At the kitchen door, gripping the bag, he risked the last inch of the inch she'd given. "Thank you, I'll keep it with the rest of her." "Get out of my kitchen," said Petunia Dursley, to the window, to the glass-still water, to a girl getting giggling in another kitchen 20 years drowned. And Harry got out, and entered it all in the copybook on the bus, pear drops, conkers, blue willow, bitten nails, first at everything, in his best hand on the page with her name, which was no longer the emptiest page but the fullest. The copybook, finished, held 311 entries. He read it through on the last Sunday of October, cover to cover, out loud, alone in his room with the door open onto the landing where Dora sat not listening with her bat, and it took him 50 minutes, and when he came downstairs afterward nobody in the kitchen could speak first. 311, said Ted, finally, husky, to his teacup. The whole Wisengamot's got 50 seats, you know. You've raised a bigger house than the government. Mine come when called too, said Harry, 6, factual, reaching for the jam, and Ted laughed until he had to leave the kitchen and came back red-eyed and ruffled Harry's hair on the way to the sink, and nobody entered anything in any record, and it was, by the measure Feversham had prescribed, a good day. He arrived at Halloween having lived. They went down to the valley at sunset on the 31st, 4 of them, the heir, the steward, the keeper, and the ghost. That Mrs. Kitely could come had been the month's one pure gift. Harry had assumed the yard held her the way walls hold. She had corrected him with relish. The dead kept to their parishes by preference and manners, not imprisonment, and for the right of a house she had adopted she would ride the water roads if the house would open them. And besides, child, I have been dead 42 years and nobody has once invited me anywhere. I'd come to the opening of a window. The river road took the living by stone and the dead by right, and she stepped out of it onto the valley turf like a woman alighting from the good train. Hat adjusted, handbag squared, and looked down the darkening valley at the mound and the willow and the dry ford silvering under the first stars, and said nothing at all for a long moment, and then quietly, well, there's older firms than mine, and took up a position at Harry's left shoulder that she did not leave again. The valley had dressed for the night. The hush lay deeper than June. The grass had gone to seed and stood silver. The great willow over the ford had let down every one of its 10,000 leaves in the windless dark, all at once, some hour before they came, and stood bare and patient over its own gold circle like a mourner who has finished with the veil. And down the length of the dry riverbed, where water had not run in the memory of maps, water was running. Dark, quick, without sound, the river of the underneath risen into its ancient bed for the one night of the year the two channels agreed, and where the road crossed it at the ford, stones stood proud of the surface, 11 of them, worn flat by feet that had crossed before there was an England. At the crypt door Andromeda stopped because the door stopped her. The threshold drew its line, and the line was courteous and total, the same grammar as the goblin's line at the vault. She knelt to bring her eyes level with his, and did not fuss his collar, and did not tell him to be brave, which he catalogued even then as the finest thing anyone had ever not said to him. What she said was stewardship to the last. Item, I will be at this door when you come up. There is no version of tonight where I am not at this door. Enter it. Entered, said Harry. Gornuck, at the door's other side, presented no parchment for once. The bank's part tonight was witness, oldest of the 4 duties, and he stood witness in full deep roads formality Harry had not seen even at the vault, black iron at the collar, the grey ledger chained at his wrist, and as Harry passed him the old goblin said in gobbledygook quietly 7 words that he refused ever afterward to translate, and struck the ledger's clasp once against the iron, a single note like a far bell, and the door in the hill stood open. 33 steps. Mrs. Kitely came down at his shoulder. The chamber received them lit as he had never seen it, every groove at flood, the 3 stone lords sharp-shadowed on their tables, the 4th table bare and swept and waiting, and the whole apparatus of the house turned like a face toward the far edge, where the lip of stone gave onto the water, and the water tonight was not a channel. It was the river entire, wide as the valley, running both above the hill and below it in a geometry the eye declined to file, and on the near bank, cut into the stone, a path led down to where the 11 stones of the ford began. The far bank existed. That was all the eye would say of it. Low gray, without feature, at a distance that refused measurement, and upon it, everywhere nowhere on it, a stillness stood and was the whole of that country. No shape, no face, no cloak and no scythe, nothing so local. A stillness with the quality of attention, the pause between the end of one song and the start of the next, scaled to the size of everything, and it was already, Harry understood with his skin, listening. Speak the banks, little heir, said the warden, and the voice tonight came not from the room but from the hill entire, root to crown, 700 years deep, formal as a rung bell. The first accounting, what you have kept will keep you. Begin. Harry took out the green copybook and stood at the head of the ford path in his fitting pajamas and Dora's outgrown Wellingtons and began to read aloud. Lily Potter, James Potter. The lights came the way the crypt had taught him lights came, without arrival. Between one name and the next the near bank had tenants, all down its length in both darknesses, standing at the water's edge the way the fen had stood in the reeds, and each name he spoke was a window going gold somewhere down the line of them. Fleamont Potter, Euphemia Potter, Henry Potter, Doria Potter, born black. The family came in close, nearest the ford, 12 generations, and he could not see faces, only presences, warmths in the silver, but the 2 nearest of all stood together, and one of them stood the exact way Harry stood, weight on the wrong foot, and something in the whole valley ached at the seeing of it. He read for 50 minutes, and he set down every cup with its own 2 hands, all the way to the table, and the tiredness came exactly where she had said it would, at the 100th, at the 200th, and he heard the weight start to slide off the ends of the names and stop mid-list in front of the river of death and all its assembling nations, and rolled his shoulders like a workman, and went back 3 names to pick up the one he had dropped, Wilfred Dan, done proper, twice for surety. And a grass-grown misery somewhere in Surrey held his coal, and nothing on either bank begrudged the pause, because the dead have nothing but time, and a child correcting himself for their sake was better entertainment than the living had offered most of them at their own funerals. He named the parish graves of St. Aldhelm, and they came, humble and astonished, invited anywhere for the first time since their bad-luck funerals. He named the roll of remembrance, and the war dead arrived in their categories, upright, buttoned. He named Alma Kitely, 4 lines down, off the brass, and the ghost at his shoulder stood in the reading light with her handbag, and let herself be named, and went, for one moment only, from silver to gold. He named the fen, Aldith, whose bead the whole valley's starlight found, Osric, Wulfmere, Sister Ethelfled, whose office joined its Latin very quietly to the naming, a descant under it. The witch-finder's mistake, entered in the copybook under the name her own village had refused to carve, Marjorie Sale, said now with the weight on, into open country, where no finder's writ had ever run. And the rush-cutter who kept his ropes, and who, being named by his keeping, stood suddenly taller than the abbess, because what is named is kept, and he had waited 900 years to be either. 311 windows, gold, down both banks of the river of death on All Hallows' Eve, lit by a 6-year-old reading aloud from a green copybook, and when he closed it the valley stood ringed in his remembering like a town seen at night from a hill, and the warden said from everywhere in a voice with grain in it, paid in full, the banks are stood, the ford is open, what was stolen from the river is called to the ford. And the second accounting of the house of Peverell, the hill bowed, the lights bowed with it, the water alone did not move, is restitution. The scar went cold, not the lodger's cold, the larder cold, the kept cold, closing around the splinter the way tongs close, and Harry felt it wake in the tightening and know, in whatever mouthful of stolen mind it had for knowing, exactly what the water was and what the date was and what came next. It did not want. Wanting was the wrong size for what it did. It clawed, blind, up every corridor of him at once, hunting a purchase, a promise, a door left ajar, and found what the summer had made. Nothing hoarded, nothing walled, no still pool of kept warmth anywhere in the child for carrion to grip. A house swept, lit, given away nightly, and the corridors themselves already flooding with the river's patience. All its screaming was very far away and very small, like a wasp in a jar in another room, and the warden's voice came once more, gentle now, gentler than Harry had ever heard it, and said, "Walk, little heir. The middle of the ford, your part is only the walking." Harry walked 11 stones. He counted them as he had counted the kitchen steps, because counting was a thing that belonged to him. At the 6th stone, the middle stone, the moment came that the house had refused to spare him, and it was this. The banks, both banks, all 311 windows and the 12 generations and the 2 warmths standing nearest with their wrong-footed stance receded, not in space, in kind. The ford's middle stood outside every keeping, his included. It was the one place in the world's whole architecture that belonged to neither bank, the hinge of the hinge. And on the 6th stone over the running dark, Harry Potter stood in the pause between 2 songs, and no one held him and nothing kept him, and he was more alone than any child has ever been or any person is until the once that everyone is, and the stillness on the far bank turned its whole attention upon him, and the attention was the coldest and the cleanest thing in creation, and it weighed him. He did not run, and he did not grasp. He stood on the stone, 6 years old, with a green copybook in one hand and a splinter of a murderer freezing in his scar, and he did the only thing that was his in the whole hinge of the world, the first right, the family trade, and he spent. "I'm glad I got to be kept," he said to the stillness, a loud, teeth-chattering spendthrift to the last. "Even just for a summer, whatever you decide." The stillness did not speak. The stillness never speaks. But 5 years earlier to the very night it had made, at another threshold, for another spendthrift, the sole exception in its long ledger. And here at the ford, weighing the sun of that account, the attention rested on him one heartbeat longer than judgment requires, which those who study such things say is the whole difference between a scale and a courtesy. And then the middle of the ford let go of its cold, and the thing in his scar came out. It came like a thorn drawn from under 5 years of skin, one long, bright, wrong-colored line of pain from forehead to sternum, a hook of smoke pulled backward through him, and there was a sound that came up out of his own mouth without asking his leave, one short cry, a child's gone at once across the water. And then it was out, hanging in the air over the 6th stone, a twist of gray-green smoke no bigger than a finger, screaming its wasp scream, casting about for any warmth in all that silver and finding the only warmth on either bank was the given kind which it could not eat, had never once in all its thefts learned how to eat. And the river reached up unhurried, the way dusk takes a garden, and took it down under, gone, one small foul seam closing in the dark water, returned to the ledger, same column, same ink, 5 years late and accurate at last. The valley rang. There is no other verb kept for it in any account. The hill, the water, the 311 windows, the stones of the ford rang one note, the note Gornuck's ledger clasp had struck against the iron scaled up to the size of the night, and every candle in every window of every remembering house in England stood, for 1 second nobody living measured, perfectly still. And on the near bank at the foot of the ford where the path came down, the two warmths that stood wrong-footed and together were, for the space that the thresholds tied allowed, not warmths. Harry never told anyone all of it. He told Andromeda most and Mrs. Kitely more, and the copybook's last page in pencil holds the only complete account, in handwriting that starts as a road out of fog and ends as a 6-year-old's again, because some sentences unimprove the hand that writes them. What the last page says is this: they were at the bottom of the ford. I was allowed to walk back to them slow. Dad is taller than Uncle Vernon and his hair does the thing mine does, and he looked at me and said, "You grew," like it was the best joke and the worst thing in both at once. Mum didn't say anything for a long time. She looked at me the way the reading light does, all the pages at once. I asked the thing I planned if I ever got to ask. I said, "The hill says your word is written on me and I can't read it. What does it say?" And she knelt down on the bank with her hands folded like the third stone lord, and she said one word. She said, "Mine, that's the word. It's been on me the whole time, under everything, where the light read. Mine." I told her I knew about the teacups, the blue ones, and catching them when she got giggling. She put her hand over her mouth exactly like Aunt Petunia does, exactly the same hand the same way, and then she laughed, and I can't write the laugh, there aren't letters for it, but the windows on both banks got brighter, all of them, all the way down. I saw it. 311 windows got brighter because my mum laughed once. They couldn't stay. I knew from the book, so I didn't ask. I asked, and Dad said, "Look after your mother's sister. She doesn't know how to want anything," and Mum said, "No charge to keep, my love, no promise, nothing owed. You're already paid for live," and the tide turned and they went up the bank with the others, and all the windows started going out one at a time like a town going to bed. The river carries, it doesn't lose anything. I checked with the warden and he said kept, and showed me the entry. It says, L. Potter. Accounting credit, see Harry. He came up the 33 steps on his own feet, counting them, all 33, because finishing a count was a kept promise to nobody but himself, and tonight of all nights he was keeping everything. And he came out of the hill at 9 minutes past midnight, on the 1st of November, with his scar gone to a faint pale line like a seam long healed, and something in his head quiet that he had never known was loud. And Andromeda Tonks was at the door, because there was no version of the night where she was not at the door. And Harry Potter, master of death, walked into the middle of her and stopped pretending to be a ledger, and cried the way 6-year-olds cry, entire, unbanked, hiccuping about everything at once and nothing he could have numbered, items unitemizable, while she knelt on the cold hill in the dark and held on and said nothing at all except once into his hair, entered. Mrs. Kitely stood a little apart with her handbag, facing the valley, giving them the privacy of her turned back. The nutcracker face was shut at its proudest. Below, the water withdrew from the ancient bed by inches, unhurried, like a tide with nowhere better to be, and the last window on the banks to go dark long after all the others was a warmth that stood where the path met the water, wrong-footed, watching the door in the hill, and was, at the very end, glad outward. The river road put them down in the Tonks kitchen at close to 2, and the kitchen was lit, because nobody in that house had so much as pretended to go to bed. Ted was at the table with the wireless murmuring, and a solicitor's pad he had covered, over 4 hours, with nothing but concentric boxes. Dora was on the floor by the stove with the bat across her knees, officially guarding a kettle. They had been forbidden the valley and had obeyed, which Harry understood by then to have been its own long walk over its own dark water. Nobody asked anything. That was the Tonks' genius, and he never stopped marveling at it. The questions stood decently back, coats on, hats in hands, and waited to be sent for. Ted looked at him once, collar to shoes, found all of him present, and pulled out the chair beside his own. Dora scrambled up and made cocoa for 4 without asking who wanted it, and made it the only way she made anything, at full commitment, and it came to the table steaming and heroic, and so sweet the spoon all but stood sentry in it, and Harry, lifting it with both hands, heard the warden across the whole of an October. The cocoa, the metamorphed child, will make you too sweet. The house under the hill had known. 3 weeks out, 700 years deep, the old dead of his line had looked down the calendar of the worst and best night of his life and seen, at the end of it, this kitchen, this girl, this cup, and had thought it worth prophesying. And Harry Potter drank the too sweet cocoa to its dregs with the tears still salt on his face, and understood that he had been told the future once by the house that never lied, and the future was, "You will be looked after." "Bed," said Andromeda eventually in the steward's voice with none of the steward left in it. "Item," said Harry at the kitchen door, because there was one entry left in the day and he was his mother's son and spent everything now always, same hour, both hands. "Dad had hair like mine, exactly like mine. It was the first thing I saw." He held the door frame, 6 years old, swaying with the weight of the paid-off night. "Nothing about me is only mine, it all comes from somebody. I used to think I was nobody S, and it turns out I'm everybody S." He considered this gravely from inside a nearly asleep body. Enter it. Entered, said the whole kitchen, all three of them ragged together, and Dora's hair, which had been gray since the 1st of October, went back to bubble gum overnight and stayed. In a forest in Albania at the hour the Ford rang, something that lived in the backs of snakes and the hollows of oaks came apart around a sensation. It had no organs left to survive honestly. Absence. One of its anchors, its dearest, its accident, its unknown insurance sunk in the living vault of the enemy's child, was not distant anymore. It was gone, unhooked, unsunk, paid into a bank it could not rob, and the shriek that went through the trees for a night and a day had no sound in it and killed nothing, and was heard by nothing except every unquiet thing in the Balkans, which turned away from it, the whole margin of a peninsula closing its pages against a creditor gone bankrupt. When it could think again, it thought an inventory, because it had always, whatever else was said of it, kept meticulous books, the diary, the cup, the diadem, the locket, the ring, the snake it had not yet made, and the sixth, the unplanned, the one in the boy, struck through, by whom it did not know. By what it could not imagine. Nothing it had read in 50 years of reading everything forbidden could unmake such a thing without unmaking the vessel, and its instruments, the scraps of sense it kept in stolen bodies, reported the vessel alive, thriving, guarded now by goblin paper and old law and something in Surrey that watched the watchers. It was not afraid. It had spent too much of itself to keep the machinery of fear. But it revised in the dark at length its arithmetic of the child potter, and the revision had, for the first time in 5 years, no contempt anywhere in it, and it began, with the patience of the discorporate, to hunt the rumor of a hill. The instruments told Albus Dumbledore at midnight, which was quick, but the wards told him first. He was at his desk when it happened, marking nothing, holding a quill over a page that had stayed blank for an hour, because he kept the vigil of the 31st as he kept all his vigils, alone with the lamps low, in the company of his exact and unsparing memory, 5 years tonight. And at 12:09, the silver instrument with the doubled smoke, the braided strands that had spun together since June, stopped, and the dark strand stood still, and the bright strand spun on alone. And then the second instrument, the old one, the one he had keyed in the 1st November to the scar itself, to the residue in the child he had never found the courage to biopsy with better instruments. The small, ugly one he kept behind the others because he could not look at it without seeing the whole distant checkmate it implied, the instrument whose steady, faithful, terrible pulse had beaten once a minute for 5 years, tick, like a second heart in the office. The countdown he had built his century's worst arithmetic upon. The boy cannot live while it lives in him. The boy must walk into death at the appointed hour, and I must be the one who keeps him whole until I spend him, went silent, not broken. He was across the office with his wand out and the diagnostic webs cast before his chair had finished falling, and the webs came back clean, cleaner than clean. The instrument was in perfect order. It was measuring perfectly. There was nothing left to measure. Albus Dumbledore stood in his office among his whirring silver conscience for a length of time he never afterward recovered, holding a dead instrument in both hands the way a man holds a stopped watch that was his father's, and the thoughts came in the order that damned him, and he knew the order damned him even as it ran and could not reorder it. First, it cannot be gone, nothing unmakes such a thing but the death of the vessel. Second, the floor going out from under the century, the boy is dead. Third, the bright strand of the first instrument spinning on serene, the wards reporting a heartbeat in Surrey by 2 o'clock, reporting it in a guest bed in Kent, alive, asleep, whole, and fourth, last, arriving only after the heartbeat had made room for it, the thought that a better man would have had first, and that he minuted against himself in the court he kept where no one else sat. Someone has done it. Someone has done the thing I decided could not be done, and therefore never attempted, and therefore built a child's death into the load-bearing wall of the future instead. And they have done it without me, without asking me, without needing me, and it is 5 years to the night, and the bill for every hour of those 5 years has just been served, and it is addressed to the architect. He did not sleep. At 3 he wrote to Minerva, 4 pages, and burned them at 4, because the pages said true things about fear and the misuses of foresight, and there was no version of Minerva reading them that did not end with her looking at him across a staff table for the rest of his life, the way Andromeda Tonks had looked at him across a kitchen. At 5 the owl came from Gringotts, black-sealed, unbidden, punctual as tide, and he broke the wax standing at the window with the first gray of November behind the mountains, and read the fence wire in the frost. Restitution made. The stolen is returned to the river. The ledger is balanced in the matter of the second accounting. The house notes, you hold one item still, ON loan. And it was there at the window, with the mountains graying and the parchment owing in his hand, and the stopped instrument on the desk behind him like a child's coffin for a clock, that the greatest wizard of the age was afraid, wholly, at last, without government. And being afraid, and being who he was, and having loved always with instruments and safeguarded always by architecture, He did the thing his fear had done every time since 1899, the thing that was in him what the splinters clawing had been in the smoke he reached to hold. The petition was drafted by 6 in his own even hand for the October session already convened, that the guardianship review in the matter of the minor H.J. Potter admit a further candidate, that the candidacy be weighed against all others on the single criterion of the child's protection in the wars to come, and that the candidate be himself. He read it through once, cold, precise, every joist arguing in good faith. He dated it the 1st of November and signed. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. On his own terms, the Wisengamot heard the matter of the minor H.J. Potter on the 18th of November, in closed family session, in courtroom 3, which was the one with the good stove, a concession to the fact that family sessions ran long and robes were cold. The month before it ran on paper and nerve. Dumbledore's petition landed on the 2nd of November, and Ted read it standing in the hall with his coat half off twice, and then sat down on the stairs, which Harry had never once seen an adult do, and said to the banister, "He's put himself in. Merlin's teeth, he's actually put himself in." The house understood the shape of it within the day, not an obstruction, a bid, the whole architecture of quiet delay abandoned overnight for the loudest instrument on the shelf, the greatest wizard of the age standing up in a courtroom to say, "Give the child to me." It read as strength. Gornuck consulted, read it otherwise, and said so in 6 words that Ted wrote out and pinned over his desk for the duration. Creditors run only when banks wobble. They prepared Harry the way you prepare a principal, not a mascot. He would attend because wizard law required the minor produced. He would speak only if the court put questions or if the one contingency arrived that Ted called in planning the ledger's turn. And above all, Andromeda said, kneeling to his eye level in the hall on the morning exact to the last, he was to understand that no outcome in that room could unmake what was already kept. They are deciding an address, Harry, not a belonging. The belonging is decided. She straightened his collar, which for once needed nothing. Item, whatever happens, there is supper. Enter it. Entered, said Harry, and put the green copybook in his coat for ballast. Mrs. Kitely had held her own preparatory session the Wednesday prior from the chest tomb, with the light going early and the yard folding itself down for winter around them. Courtrooms, she said, I sat through 2 inquests and a probate in my day, and I'll tell you what a courtroom is, child. It's a yard for the living. Same rows, same stones with names on, same fidgeting about who's remembered right. The plum robes will look at you and see a legend or a lever or a nice little annuity, according to their natures, and your job is the job it's always been. Stand still, be looked at, say the true thing with the weight on, and don't count them out loud. She had straightened the felt flower, which was her gavel. One thing more, your lavender man will be at his best in that room, mind. Great men always are in rooms, rooms are what they're for. Don't let his best confuse you about the rest, and don't let the rest confuse you about his best either. Both books get kept. You taught me that, you and your Hill, and I've been dead long enough to know when I've learned something. There was one further petitioner nobody had invited. On the Friday before the hearing, a claim of kinship consideration arrived at the registry, drafted by the most expensive hand in wizarding London, on behalf of the House of Malfoy, citing the minor's descent through Doria Black from the most ancient and noble House of Black, and noting that Narcissa Malfoy, born Black, stood among the child's nearest magical kin of full blood and unblemished standing, and that the Malfoys' resources in the matter of a vulnerable and historically significant minor were. The instrument allowed itself to observe considerable. Ted read it aloud at the kitchen table with mounting professional admiration, the vintage kind reserved for really well-made bad faith. Andromeda took it from him, read it once, and was silent for a moment in a fashion that made Dora, at the far end of the table, quietly move the butter dish. My sister, she said at last evenly, has not spoken my name since 1972, and has now paid 100 galleons a page to become my nephew's nearest kin of unblemished standing. She set the parchment down and squared its edges. Lucius has priced the boy as an asset with the seal still wet. He will not be the last. Item, we answer with the tapestry work order. And they did. The bank produced from escrow the original commission by which the House of Black had burned Andromeda from the family tapestry, and Ted attached it to a response of a single sentence, observing that the petitioners could claim the minor through the House of Black, or maintain the House of Black's own instrument declaring that house to have no connection with the child's line of custody, but that even the Malfoys' celebrated resources did not extend to filing both. And the kinship claim was withdrawn before the weekend, quietly, the way expensive things go when they fail, and Narcissa Malfoy, at her own breakfast table, read her husband's face over the marmalade and asked no question at all. Courtroom 3 held perhaps 60 that morning, the family bench of the Wisengamot in plum, a stenographer, a bailiff, the parties, and by treaty right invoked for the first time in living memory, a delegation of one from Gringotts at a table of its own, with a grey ledger chained at the wrist. The plum benches had been told a guardianship review. The plum benches had also, being the plum benches, heard everything July had whispered and August had shouted, and when the tiny party came in with the child in the middle, 60 pairs of eyes went to a 6-year-old's forehead and found nothing there but a faint pale seam, like an old scratch, and the whisper that ran the benches was its own exhibit. Madame Amelia Bones took the chair at 9. That she took it at all was the morning's first engagement, fought and won on paper the week before. The chief warlock presided over family sessions by right and custom, and the chief warlock had been, until Wednesday, fully intending to preside over this one, having appointed himself simultaneously a petitioner in it, an arrangement so nakedly improper that only a century of nobody ever checking had let it reach the docket. Andromeda Tonks had checked. Her motion for recusal, drafted with Ted and a goblin conveyancer for the pleasure of it, cited 3 precedents and 1 document. An inventory notice under bank seal regarding an item of estate property of the late J. Potter, held these 5 years by the petitioner Dumbledore, APWB, against an expired loan. And the motion observed in language of surgical courtesy that a man could be a candidate for the guardianship of an estate, or the holder of its unreturned property, or the judge of the whole question, but that even the chief warlock's celebrated capacities did not extend to being all 3 at once. The benches had gasped in session on the reading. It was not the impropriety, the plum ranks had slept through worse. It was the item, the Potter cloak. Everyone over 40 had heard of the Potter cloak the way you hear of other families' heirlooms vaguely at weddings. And here was Albus Dumbledore, 5 years widowed of his own reputation for a morning, listed on a bank instrument as its keeper past term, and the word the instrument used, translated from the goblin with the bank's usual care in these matters, was the old word, the ledger word, ode. He had not contested the motion. That, the connoisseurs on the benches said afterward, was the moment the morning turned. He had risen, thanked the mover for her diligence with a courtesy that had no floor under it anywhere, and recused himself to the petitioner's table, and sat down beside his own hat, an old man in half-moon spectacles at a table built for the accused's counsel, and the stove ticked, and Madame Bones, ascending, looked out over the assembly with the expression of a woman who intended to be obeyed in her own courtroom if it took until spring. "This is a family session," she said. "It concerns one child. It is not a circus, a séance, a treaty conference, or a book launch, and I will clear it to the walls the first time it forgets that. Petitioners will be heard in order of filing. The Dursleys had filed nothing and sent nothing. A ministry visitor dispatched to Privet Drive had returned with a signed waiver and a report she declined to summarize aloud. The Department of Mysteries had filed, technically not for guardianship, but for what its instrument called custodial proximity for purposes of study. An unspeakable named Croaker rising to explain in the flattened voice of his craft that the minor represented a class of magical event with no living precedent, that the department's interest was benign, continuous, and purely observational, and that suitable quarters existed at the ministry itself. It got no further than quarters. The courtroom did the thing courtrooms do when every faction at last agrees. It went silent in unison, one big animal deciding. Bones let the silence do its work, then asked Croaker whether the department had ever previously proposed housing a 6-year-old in the basement of a government building for observation. And the unspeakable, consulting his notes, conceded that precedent was thin, and Bones inquired further, in a voice acquiring edges, what exactly the department proposed to observe. And Croaker, retreating into his craft, replied that the answer was itself classified, at which the goblin table was heard to make a brief dry sound, one note like flint acknowledging steel, and the grey ledger's clasp clicked once, and Croaker, an unspeakable of 30 years standing who had walked past the veil twice a day for most of them, looked at the chain book and sat down, unprompted, mid-sentence, and did not elaborate then or ever on why. The petition was dismissed with costs in a voice that filed the entire department under try that again and see. Dumbledore at the wrong table had watched the dismissal go down with his whole frame easing an inch, and Harry, watching him watch, entered it because exactness was the family trade. He is not everything that circles me. Some of what he does is guarding. The book must say so. Then the morning came to its principles and became, for 2 hours, a duel of architectures. Dumbledore spoke plainly, which the benches had not expected, and Harry had. No grandfather warmth, none of the garden's lavender. He gave them the cold ledger of the age, that the war was not over, whatever the calendars said, that the instruments of his long watch reported movement in the east that had no innocent reading, that the child had already been taken once from a public street by mere commerce, and that what was coming for him in time was not commerce. That he, Dumbledore, had failed the boy already in ways he did not propose to soften for the court, and named 3 of them unprompted into the record, the sealed will first, and heard the benches murmur and did not pause for it. And that he stood in this courtroom for one reason only, which was that when the Second War came, the child at the center of it would need the most defensible position in Britain, and there was exactly one, and he was its headmaster. It was, Ted admitted afterward, a great speech, the more terrible for its honesty. He offered the court a fortress. Bones put one question only. You name your own failures freely, Chief Warlock, which this chair notes and does not often see. Answer one more. If the child were nobody, no scar, no prophecy of anyone's, no war coming to his door, would you be in this room? And the courtroom watched the greatest wizard of the age take the full weight of it unhurried and answer at last, no, with the weight on, and watched him add nothing to it, no scaffolding, no greater good, the single syllable standing alone in the record like a stone in a field. And several of the plumb benches understood that they had just heard the most expensive word he had said in 50 years, and that both petitions had, in a sense, been argued by the same man. Andromeda Tonks offered it a family, and did it characteristically by declining to perform one. She called Feversham, who put into the record, in the bloodless idiom of healers, what 5 years in a cupboard writes into a growing body, item by item, and what 5 months of Saturdays had already unwritten. She called Arbella Fig, who arrived in her good coat with a handbag Mrs. Kitely would have respected, and who told the plumb benches to their faces that she had watched at her window for 5 years on the instructions of the petitioner at the wrong table, and had been given to understand it was for the boy's protection, and had come to understand instead, she said, gripping the handbag, that watching a child is not the same as watching over one. And the difference had cost her 20 minutes at a kitchen table she would be seeing the rest of her life. She called nobody else. She tabled the file, the healer's charts, the snatching case, the Doggett's agreed statement with its impossible items, the bank's welfare minutes, 5 months of numbered Saturdays. And she said, closing in the voice with everything banked, the petitioner offers this court a fortress, and he is right, he has the only one. When the war he foresees arrives, my house will be glad of his walls and will say so. But this is a family session. It is not deciding where Harry Potter will make his stand. It is deciding where he will lose his milk teeth. The petitioner has confused those questions his whole great life, and I am asking this court with respect not to confuse them for him one more time at the expense of one more child. The stove ticked. On the plumb benches, several people looked at their hands. Bones turned to the child's table. The minor is entitled to be heard, and nothing obliges him. Harry, is there anything you want this court to know? And Harry Potter slid down from his chair and stood on the courtroom floor of courtroom 3, 6 years old, in clothes bought for him and no one previous, with a green copybook under his arm because ballast is ballast, and gave the wizarding world the 2 minutes it would still be quoting when he was 40. He kept my dad's cloak, Harry said, nodding sideways at the petitioner's table without heat, a boy establishing the facts before the reasoning the way the parlor had taught him. My dad lent it to him before I was born for a month, and my mum and dad died, and he kept it. 5 years, I found out this summer. He looked up at the benches, working it through in front of them unhurried. At my aunt's, if I kept something that wasn't mine and didn't give it back, they'd call me a thief. They'd call me one even if I only kept a pencil. A consideration, the terrible fairness. I don't think he's a thief. I've thought about it a lot. I think he's the other thing. I think he's someone who's so sure he knows what's safest that things stop looking like they belong to people. My cloak stopped looking like mine. I stopped looking like mine. I look like a piece of the war he's getting ready for. He turned then and looked directly at the wrong table, at the half-moon spectacles, and the courtroom held its breath, and the periwinkle eyes came up and met the green ones and did not defend themselves, which even his enemies on the benches noted and had never once seen. He said James and Lily properly in the garden, one each with the weight on. He's the only grown wizard who ever has, so I don't want the court to think I'm saying he's bad. I'm saying he forgot people are allowed to want their things back even when the person keeping them is clever about danger, and I want my things back. The green copybook shifted under his arm. My cloak, my name, me. I'm not choosing between his fortress and their kitchen. That's not the real choosing. The real choosing is whether I belong to somebody or to something. I've done being a something, every kind of something. A burden and a secret and a weapon for later. The Tonkses signed for somebody. Item finished, and he climbed back onto his chair and folded his hands on the table like the third stone lord, and the stenographer, a woman of 30 years' service, could be heard across the whole silent courtroom turning her page. What happened next, the record renders as intervention of instrument treaty, because the record had no better box for it. The gray ledger chained at the goblin table opened itself. Gornuk did not touch it. Gornuk, in fact, stood away from it and bowed once to the book, a bow the benches had never seen a goblin give anything, and the ledger's pages turned by themselves to the day's leaf, and the courtroom's torches bowed all together as the temperature stepped down not into chill but into hush, larder cold, kept cold, the cold of a place where good things last. And frost bloomed on the open page in lines visible at 60 feet, and rose off it, and stood in the air of courtroom 3 in spiral letters legible to every literate eye, while a voice that was many voices braided, dry and level and 700 years deep, arrived in the chamber not through the ears but from underneath, and observed. The House thanks the court for its attention to the address of its heir. The House instructs the court without disrespect that addresses are the full extent of the court's writ in this matter. The court does not sit over the line of the 3, no court ever has. The court's own statute of dangerous inheritances is D&IED purchase, as is its abeyance, as is any instrument drafted in fear by any hand, however great, however well meant. What the river has sealed, parliaments do not review. The House states its terms, which are old and short. The heir resides where his dead are honored. The court may consult its morning's evidence as to where that has proved to be. The item on loan is returned before the season turns or the house collects, and the third accounting of the heir will be witnessed at the house's door by those the heir names. The house notes for the comfort of the bench that no child of the line has ever failed it. The house notes further for its own satisfaction that none has ever come to it so well kept. The frost stood one moment more, then went down into the page like the river taking a name, and the torches straightened, and in the ringing quiet of courtroom 3, Madame Amelia Bones, who would be described by every witness as the only person present who had not visibly moved, said, "The court thanks the House," and after the briefest of pauses of her career, for its guidance on jurisdiction, and the stenographer wrote that down too. They broke for the noon recess with the verdict of formality, and it was in the recess in the marble corridor outside courtroom 3, that Albus Dumbledore withdrew his petition in person to the petitioner it had been aimed at, on one knee on the cold floor to bring his eyes level, at the eye height the whole year had been teaching everyone to come down to. "I find," he said, quietly cold and precise to the end, because the child deserved the unperformed version, "that I have been offered terms and that they are better than my own. You said you had done being a weapon for later. I am going to tell you the exact truth once, Harry, and then spend some years earning the right to have said it. Later was my entire design, every wall of it." And a man who hears a house 7 centuries dead say so well kept of a child he left on a doorstep has arrived at the far edge of his own arguments. He rose, and from inside his robes, wrapped in tissue gone soft with 5 years of a locked drawer, he brought out a folded silver-gray shimmer that ran in the corridor's torchlight like the top of the river at night, and he did not hand it to the steward or to the bank or to the record. He put the cloak of the third brother into the hands of the third brother's heir directly, the way you return something to its owner, and the shimmer came awake at the touch of it, gladly, unmistakably, cloth remembering a shape it was cut to, and the last hallow went home. "It served your father well," said Albus Dumbledore. "It has been too long from home. Both sentences are the truth, only one of them is an excuse." Harry stood in the marble corridor with the whole silver weight of his house's oldest keeping alive across his 2 arms, and it was not heavy. It had never in 700 years been heavy for anyone it belonged to, and he looked up at the old man on his knee on the cold floor and did the accounting out loud because that was the trade, and because nobody else in the corridor had standing to do it. "Entered," he said, "both columns." And then, because the terrible fairness cut every direction always, or it was not fairness, "You came down to my eyes to say it. Nobody does that. Even the nice ones bend over. You came down." He considered the wet slate shimmer running over his arms and the man who had carried it 5 years and returned it able still to run. "When I'm 11 and I come to your school, you can tell me about my dad wearing it, not the war bits, the daft bits. There'll have been daft bits. It turns you invisible," and he was 15. A breath level, the weight set on the exact word. "That can be the interest on the loan." "That," said Albus Dumbledore, rising, and his voice cracked precisely once on the first syllable and was governed by the second, "is the only rate I have ever been offered that I am certain I cannot afford. I shall pay it anyway." The third accounting was held at the crypt on the last Sunday of November at dusk, and the heir named his witnesses, Andromeda and Ted Tonks, Nymphadora Tonks, who cried at the door and denied it lifelong, Gornuck, keeper of standing instructions in Deep Road's iron, Arabella Figg, who was walked down the valley on Ted's arm and said afterward only that it was the first time in 60 years anybody had invited the likes of her to anything that mattered. Alma Kitely, 4 lines down on a brass in Surrey, standing at the boy's left shoulder where she had decided the 20th century's manners required her, and to the visible astonishment of every other name on the list, summoned by a letter in a 6-year-old's improving hand that he kept until he died, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The walk down the valley sorted them the way the valley sorted everything. Gornuck went first, by right of the 4 duties, iron collar catching the last light. Mrs. Figg came on Ted's arm, slower and slower, not from age. She kept stopping to look at the silver grass and the bare willow and the mound with its broken walls, and at the third stop she said to nobody, in a voice from 60 years down, "My grandmother used to talk about the old firms, the ones from before Wands. We thought she was wandering," and Ted patted her hand and did not hurry her, having learned his hurrying manners in the same school as his daughter's Coco. Dora walked exactly beside Harry the whole way, matching his stride with the fierce concentration she brought to nothing else on earth, boots for once silent, hair banked down to its homework brown, and at the lip of the valley she had taken one look at the hush lying over everything like snow and reached over without a word and taken his hand, and Harry, who 18 months ago had flinched from every reaching thing in England, took it, and that was the whole of what they ever said about it. They stood inside the ring of the old walls at the head of the 33 steps, and the door in the hill stood open, and the warden came up into the November air like dusk given a grammar, and the rite, for all the year it crowned, was short. The old rites are all short, length is for instruments drafted in fear. Here the third accounting, said the house of Peverell to the air and the witnesses and the bare willow and the first faint stars. The first was remembrance, and he paid it entire. The second was restitution, and he walked it awake. The third is the oldest and the narrowest gate, and the reason the greedy have never once in 700 years worn this house's title, though they died reaching. The third accounting is relinquishment. The voice turned and addressed itself to the child alone, and the witnesses heard it anyway because they were meant to. Little heir, last of the line, master of death by blood, by crossing, and by the word of this house. Here are the keys, and this is not a test with a hidden bottom. The house does not play at giving. Everything the line ever gathered stands open to you tonight, now at 6. The deep arts entire, the ledgers unsealed, the river roads all, the standing of the name, dominion over every keeping of hours between the 4 seas. Grown men have knelt on this hill and begged to be believed capable of carrying it. You have only to say yes, and none of it will ever be taken from you, for it would be yours by right and right together. The dusk drew breath, or you may set it down, speak as you choose. The house will love you either way, for the house has read your pages and knows what was done to you by littleness, and would understand better than any court in the loud world if the smallest boy in Surrey chose never to be small again. Silence on the hill. Dora's knuckles were white on her father's sleeve. Dumbledore stood hatless, and his face, the witnesses agreed, was the face of a man watching an examination he had sat once, long ago, in another valley of himself, and failed. Harry Potter stood in his fitting coat with the cloak of his house folded over his arm, because he had asked whether he might bring it, and the house had said it has walked to this door 1,000 times. It knows the way, and he looked down the darkening valley at the ford where the water was not risen tonight, where 11 worn stones crossed a dry channel that was a river all the same, and he thought of Wanting, which he had studied all his life from underneath, Dudley's mountain of broken presents. Vernon's jabbing hunger for the neighbor's regard, Wren's 17 drawers, the splinter all mouth starving at a feast, the second brother's stone hand curled around a thing it could not keep, the first brother's carved wind bragging to a knife. And he thought of the only people in 700 years of the house's books who had ever been described as paid entire, and how one of them had asked for the means to walk home, and one of them had knelt on a far bank 6 years ago with her hands folded and told him, nothing owed. Live. Not yet, said Harry, 6 years old to everything, and the 2 words went down the valley like the Ford's own note. That's my whole answer, so I'll say it properly with the weight on. I'm not saying no, it's mine, and I'm not ashamed it's mine, and someday I'll be tall enough to carry it without it carrying me. But if I take it now, I'll be the boy who never got to be a boy, standing in the middle of the Ford forever, and I've been out there, and nobody should live at the middle. I want to lose my milk teeth at the Tonkses. I want to be 11 and get a wand from the shop that bowed at me and be terrible at something and get told off for tracking mud. You keep it all for me. That's what this house does best in the whole world, it keeps. He stepped forward and laid one hand flat on the doorstone of his ancestors and finished the rite that no greedy man had ever finished in the language of his own 6 years. Keep my things till I grow into them. I'll come on Sundays, not a promise, a plan. The hill rang, softer than Halloween, a note for a family occasion. Down in the chamber, though only the warden and one ghost ever saw it, light ran along the 4th table, the short one, the empty one, and cut into its edge, unhurried, in the spiral letters, a name and the dates after the name it left blank, and the blankness had no menace in it at all. It was the blankness of a ledger page in credit, of a book held open at tomorrow, and on the plinth's face beneath the name, the house entered its judgment for the 7 centuries to read, Harry, last and first. He set it down, and so it is his. And the warden's voice, as the door swung to for the winter, said only in the oldest, driest strand of the braid, with the satisfaction of a grandfather at the end of a long harvest, walk home, little heir. As for the rest of the estate, the record of that dusk holds 2 lines more. Asked by the bank for the disposition of the second brother's stone, wherever it might lie, the heir directed, let it lie. It's in a ring that hurts people, and one day someone will find it, and when they do, the finding belongs at the Ford, not in a pocket. Enter that. And asked for completeness concerning the first brother's wand, of whose whereabouts the bank's ledgers held. It noted neutrally, a strong opinion. Harry had looked for a moment at the oldest of his witnesses, at the man standing hatless in the November dusk with his own long wand at his side and his face still full of the failed examination. And the heir of the house of Peverell had rendered, at 6, the ruling the Hallows had waited half a millennium of blood for. Let it stay with whoever s holding it all the way to the end of them. It's not a prize, it was never a prize, it's a debt, and debts come home on their own. Nobody in the valley but one old man understood the size of what had just been declined to be collected, and the one old man stood very still, in the way of a person feeling a verdict pass over him like weather deciding, after all, not to break. And when the party turned for the river road, he was the last up the path, and at the crest he stopped Harry, and the two of them stood a moment apart from the others, the first brother's wand in an old man's pocket and the third brother's cloak over a child's arm. Harry got there first. He dug in his other pocket and held it out on his palm, river-worn, flat, gray-black, purring faintly, patient. The Surrey stone, his first, the one the dark water had rolled up into his hands in June. "You can hold it," he said, "just hold it. It lets you come back from far away. That's all it does, really, when you get down to it." He watched the old man look at the stone and not take it, hands at his sides, a man at a door. "Mrs. Kitely says people who have been refused at doors split two ways. I looked it up, what your initials did, some of it, the papers from the old war. I know you went far away once, and I know you never came all the way back. You look at the hinge of things the same as I used to look at the cupboard lock." He kept his palm out, patient as a stone himself. "It's not the deep magic, this bit. You don't need a mark or a crossing. You just need somewhere that counts as home when you aim. That's the whole toll. Have you got one?" And Albus Dumbledore, who had stood before the mirror of Arist and the tomb of his sister and the wreck of his oldest love without once permitting his face to move, looked at a pebble on a 6-year-old's palm in a darkening valley, and his face moved. And he reached out and touched the toll stone with one finger, the way you touch a thing to make it true, and said in a voice the biographies never got and only one witness ever heard, "I am trying to remember, Harry. I believe I had one. It had a goat in it and a girl." "Start there," said Harry. "Names are payment. I learned that here." Guardianship was entered the first week of December. To Edward and Andromeda Tonks, jointly full and unconditional, the wards at Privet Drive acknowledged in a schedule as historic and superseded, the bank recorded as party of standing, and the file, on Madame Bones's own instruction, sealed to the working level and cross-referenced, for reasons she declined to minute, to nothing at all. He kept the Sundays. The first was the 7th of December, and the River Road learned the new geometry without complaint. Kent to the Valley, one small passenger with a green copybook, and that first week a list of questions Dora had made him promise to ask, of which the warden answered 2, declined one on grounds of you are 6, and one on grounds of she is 13, and pronounced the metamorphed child on the evidence of her questions, wasted on the horrors she reportedly dreamed of joining. The house had known only one other mind that went at the world so entirely sideways, and it had invented the river roads. Harry carried the verdict home like a parcel, and Dora wore it for a month. He kept the Wednesdays too. The yard at St. Aldhelm's had heard everything, of course, days before he came. News travels down the water, and a right witnessed by the drowned of 2 counties does not stay parochial. Old Hobbs came up for the second time in half a century to look at him over the railings of the table tomb, and pronounced the drainage implications of a risen ford considerable, and went back down satisfied for another 30 years. The Marchbank sisters were reported, by sources, to have exchanged 11 words on the subject, their longest conversation since the hatpin. And Mrs. Alma Kitely sat on her chest tomb with her handbag squared and heard his account of the guardianship order, forwards and then backwards, and at the end of it she looked down the winter yard, at the stones, at the bare chestnut, at the whole silver parish of her long residence, and said, "Well, I've seen a thing worth staying for. That's more than most manage on either side of the grass." And then sharply, before anything could be made of it, "I'm not going anywhere, child. Don't look at me like the vicar. I've decades in me yet. Somebody has to keep your Wednesdays honest." Christmas came to the Tonks house the way everything came to the Tonks house, at full commitment and slightly broken. The tree went over twice, both times attributably. There were presents with his name on them, plural, wrapped, a category of object he inspected from several sides before committing, and the last of them, produced by Dora with the ceremony of a state funeral and the grin of her father, was a sock. A single sock, woolly, violently purple and lumpy at the toe, and in the toe, when he worked it out, a marble, new glass with a curl of bubblegum pink twisting through its middle like a question mark. "You had a sock with your whole life in it," said Dora, 13, hair blazing, watching him with sudden total uncertainty, the family gift for exactness arriving in her generation as recklessness that occasionally landed. "Mum told me, so that's the first thing for the new one. It's me. Obviously, the pink bits me." The old sock retired to the shelf that night, flat at last, honorably empty, between the copybook and the stones. The new one went under his pillow with one marble in it, and the accounting of the House of Peverell, which had absorbed without comment the wand of destiny, the stone of the returning dead, and the cloak of the third brother, recorded nowhere, in any ledger, in any hand, what its heir considered the year's material acquisition. But the house under the hill knew, the way it knew everything that mattered and nothing that didn't, and was, in the deep of the winter water, in its 700-year-old fashion, glad outward. The first breakfast of the rest of it was a Tuesday. It went like this and would go like this, with variations, for years. The smell of toast climbing the stairs ahead of the light, Ted's wireless arguing quietly with itself about Quidditch, Dora thundering past his door running late for the night bus stop with one boot on, hair doing its bubblegum best, banging the landing rail the same place every morning, the bang as reliable as a lighthouse. The cloak lay folded at the foot of his bed, where it lived now, because Andromeda had begun to say it was to be kept safe in a drawer and had looked at it running silver over the blanketin like the top of a river at night, and had heard herself and had said instead, "Keep it where he can find you," to the cloak, which was not how she had meant the sentence to come out, and it had stayed at the bed foot ever after. On the shelf above the desk, in plain sight, unhidden for the first time in its existence, stood the whole estate of the cupboard years. One plastic soldier kneeling, one green marble, one milk bottle top gone soft at the crimp, and two river stones that kept the shelf cold as a larder in the room all night, every night, quiet as a kept place. The green copybook leaned against them. There was space left on the shelf. He was 6, going on the whole rest of it. There would be more to keep. Rain had come in the night off the channel, and under the rain, if you were the sort of person who could hear the underneath of things, the sound of water ran below the garden, below the county, below everything, patient as ledgers, going down to the sea past a hill in the west with a door in it, shut warm for the winter, keeping. Harry, Ted's voice up the stairwell through the toast smell, the ordinary trumpet of the ordinary morning. Breakfast, your eggs done and your sister's eaten your first one. Not his sister, said Dora's voice hotly from the hall, through a mouthful of the evidence. It's being reviewed. Harry Potter, Master of Death, put on his slippers. His name was being called from downstairs in a kept house by people who would notice if he didn't come. Of everything the year had opened to him, the vault and the valley, the ford and the frost, this one still worked on him like the first morning of the world every single time, and he had stopped being embarrassed about it, the calling and the coming and the being expected. He went down to answer it. Chapter 7 end.